Do 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 da da dum dum da da dum dum da da dum dum da da dum dum da da. There, this is the link. All right, let's go. All right, let's see. I always wonder what exactly low latency translates to. Turns out about 30 seconds? Sounds good. All right, let me tweet this bad boy. And then we can get this party, this completely unplanned party, started. Okay. Ta-da. Fantastico. Hello, everybody. How's, what's the vibe tonight, lads? We've had a pretty complicated week, and I'm taking advantage of the rampant exhaustion of everybody else to, hijack, as is my wont, as per the usual. Now, unhelpfully, I once again gave y'all the option to vote for unrestrained chaos, and obviously you did. In fact, this time, 47% of you did, which is a really great illustration of why splitting the vote is devastating to democracy. Anyway, typically when I'm doing a sort of unmanaged stream like this, I just sort of take prompting from the chat. So once you guys get all the shouting out of your system, I figure we can start having a nice little tasty chat. For tonight's drinks, I considered putting up a poll that was like, should I drink regular tea or should I drink that absolutely terrible turmeric tea that I let oversteep for 4 hours that one time? But I decided I was going to retain autonomy, so instead I made myself some mint tea, and I also have like a smoothie that I kind of just threw together because I'm not very good at making smoothies yet. And it's alarmingly green because it has like veggie powder in it. So that's also present, but that one actually tastes good, so don't worry, fam. I'm learning the self-care. Anyway, let's see. Oh boy, I already see Discworld thoughts in the chat. One thing I really actually appreciated about Worldcon is they had, like, in the expo hall, they had a full booth just dedicated to the works of Terry Pratchett. They had a bunch of like posters and maps and a lot of little references. And I was there with Blue and Indigo, and neither of them are really like Discworldy people. So I had to be like, look, here's why that bundle of lilacs on the board nearly moved me to tears. And of course, Indigo is doing some editing for Dominic Noble, friend of the channel and overall great YouTuber. Check him out if you haven't already. And mentioned that whenever he also talks about Terry Pratchett, there's a little, like, the lump in the throat thing. And it's like, look, man, if you don't read Discworld, you don't understand. Anyway, Discworld is really good. I recently listened to the audiobook for Thud for the first-ish time. I've read the book before several times, but I'm not typically a big audiobook person. But I think I'm changing that because it's really good background noise when I work, especially if it's a book I've already read and kind of know what's happening. So everybody should read the City Watch series, and that's end program. There we go. Oh god. Okay, I'm sorry. What's your opinion on Fortnite's take on Midas? Alright, Fortnite is not a game I play or particularly understand, and I feel like every time I look back at it, it's gotten fucking crazier. It's like, it started off as like a simple battle royale thing, and now it's kind of just evolved into Smash Bros. Open world, I guess? I don't know how to feel about that. Is Midas in the game, or are you guys fucking with me? I don't know. I guess people who enjoy it. with me in video games, it's a little bit complicated, all right? I need to get through it not to 100%, but to my own personal satisfaction. And, like, big multiplayer online games, I can't do that. The only exception to my personal rule is Minecraft, and even then I need to give myself, like, projects. Otherwise, it's just not pleasant. And Smash Bros. I do enjoy playing Smash Bros. With a squad because it gets very shouty and extremely fun, and I've been petitioning the others to let me stream Smash for ages. The only concern is that we'll get too heated, but personally that feels like a non-problem. So someday I'll wear them down, and you'll get the stream you deserve. But yeah, for me, the video games that, like, eat my attention are the ones that have, like, a set end goal, which basically means that if it's a Zelda game, I will get just roped into it and spend a week doing nothing but that, basically. That's how Twilight Princess and Breath of the Wild both got me. Twilight Princess was funny because I did that in college when I needed to be doing other stuff, but I just got so invested. I got so invested in rescuing Zelda. And, well, I guess it's less rescuing Zelda, that game. It's mostly rescuing your weirdo friends, and then later Midna. I got so invested in rescuing Midna, you guys, in the bit where you're the wolf and, like, she's sick, and she can't help you jump up that one tower. I was like, Midna, hang on, girl! So, yeah, and then the exact same thing hit me when I was playing Breath of the Wild. The level to which I was down bad with Breath of the Wild is that, I caught myself, like, I want to say 2/3 of the way through my playthrough. I was getting, like, the jewelry upgraded at one of the fairy fountains, and the thought arose to me, like, oh man, after I rescue Zelda, I'd love to give these to her. And then I stepped back and was like, what the fuck am I talking about? So that's how bad video games scramble my brain. So I can't do them very often. So this is a very long-winded explanation for why I don't know shit about Fortnite. Anyway, let's see. I haven't played Undertale, but I've seen people play it. I feel like that's probably better. It would stress me out too much to not get the perfect ending. Oh no. Let's see. Oh, so, sorry, there's a comment. Thoughts on Superman and his relationship with Superboy and Young Justice. This is fun because this comment is a rabbit hole of rage for me. And obviously, for context, we have now 2 detailed diatribes about Superman, and they're very good, and everybody should go watch them, especially the second one because it just came out and Blue had a lot of really good thoughts on Superman. One of the first signs I had that maybe I wasn't going to like Young Justice so much is how they portrayed Superman and Superboy's relationship. It didn't really surprise me because one common thing about stories that are sort of aimed at younger audiences is that it'll often make it so that the adults in those stories sort of by definition don't exactly act like responsible adults, you know? Because if they were acting like responsible adults, the kid heroes wouldn't really have much of an opportunity to be heroic. So you end up with characters that are, by all rights, should know better and act better, but don't. And it's just kind of a component of the genre. But I think if you're gonna do like a this is the next generation of heroes kind of setting, you probably shouldn't take your good-hearted paragon hero and be like, what if he was a shitty dad? And I don't know why this is like the one thing that they all do, because they did that in Korra, and did they do that in Naruto? I heard they did that in Naruto, but Naruto was also not my thing, so I don't know. But it's just like they can't conceive of a world where these... Oh, and they did it in Cursed Child, but I mean, there's so much more wrong with that than just the shitty daddening of a character who should by all rights know better and be more heroic. I just don't know why this is so common, and I don't want to write it off as it's just easier for the writers. This is kind of like how... It's like writers love writing stories where characters fall in love, but they don't necessarily like writing stories where the characters are in love, you know? Like, if you have a movie where at the end the main couple kiss, in the sequel, maybe they, like, break up, and then they spend the movie getting back together, and then they get another big kiss, because they know how to do the build-up for the big smoocheroonie, but they don't actually know how to write 2 people who just love each other. And I guess it's kind of similar to, like... Well, I don't know. It doesn't directly map to the the shitty daddening of beloved kid heroes, but I think that it is sort of tied into like writers having difficulty writing functional character dynamics or feeling that it's 1,334 viewers. That's oh wait, no, that's not quite funny. Wow. And here I was being all like, psh, I'm fine after that con. I'm used to this stuff. My brain's working perfectly. I can recognize numbers and shit. Anyway, the shitty daddening of kid heroes. I think it ties into just this overarching idea that, like, writing conflict is A, mandatory, and B, easier than writing anything else. Because it's like, oh, you've got these characters. If you have them, like, having a functional relationship, well, there's no conflict there. And it's like, well, maybe not. But just because a story probably needs to have some form of conflict in it to be interesting doesn't mean it needs conflict all the way down. There's a lot of joy to be had from characters that actually get along well and manage the conflict of the story together. And you know what? Maybe all these guys are just working out parental issues of their own. Maybe I shouldn't be judging. You know, it's kind of like the theory that the reason why there are so many, like, serious hairy dad games now is because a lot of those game developers are reaching the age where they are becoming serious hairy dads, and now they can't relate to, like, angry Kratos ripping his way through a pantheon out of sheer unbridled suicidal rage, and now they're like, no, I gotta set a good example for the kiddywinks. Anyway, I think that making Superman a bad dad is hugely depressing, and I'm glad that they're not really doing that in the current comics as I understand it, and I don't think they're doing it in Lois and Clark, or wait, what's it? No, Superman and Lois. Sorry, Lois and Clark was the other one. They seem to be letting Superman be a good dad now, which I like, because that seems to follow naturally from him being a good everything else. Anyway, let's see. You ever see the new Gargoyles comics? I did read the tie-in Gargoyles comics a while back, and they have a similar problem for me as the tie-in Firefly comics, which is, I don't really like what the last season of that show did, but the comics have to adhere to that as canon. This is perfectly reasonable. This is a completely reasonable thing to hold comics to, but it does mean that almost all the post-canon content is colored by these arcs that I didn't like. Or these, you know, they can't include these characters that I did like, which is why my brain tends to just sort of like pick and choose the parts I do enjoy and is like, yeah, this is good and everything else is whatever. Let's see. Did I see? I still haven't watched Rise of the TMNT, guys. I might at some point. It's just like, it's a bit much for me. I've seen some of the animation, and it's really incredible looking. But recently, I've occasionally encountered a cartoon where I'm like, oh no, I might actually be a little mature for this. I don't know what it is. It's like the sugar content is too high for me all of a sudden. Stormhawk's detailed diatribe? Well, if we got Indigo on a detailed diatribe, we'd have to do that. But, like, honestly, I kind of turned that show into a running gag for her because I think it's very funny how that specific, like, flavor of spice of, like, I hyperfixated on this thing and I don't know why and it doesn't hold up, but man, it gave me so much brain juice. It's just very funny to poke that button in other people and myself. And Stormhawks is such an interesting case because having watched through it, like, only once, and even then, I'm not even sure I made it through the back half of the season linearly. I might have skipped to the ending. It's just like, you look at it and you're like, wow, this would hardwire the brain of like an 8 to 12-year-old. If they saw it at the right time, this would shore up the fundamental substrate of their mindscape. Like, you wouldn't be able to escape this. It's just so much stuff that kids that age adore. It's like you got a group of friends, and they're all kids, and they all have really cool outfits and like hoverboards, and they live together on an airship, and there are no adults. And it's like, well, I mean, there are adults, but the adults all think they're cool, and it's like, yes, good. So, you know, that like taps into the primal, like, I don't know, like Magic Treehouse desire to have a secret base where nobody can make you do your homework. It is also one of the only shows I've ever seen where, like, the main villain is also fully a child. I feel like that doesn't get talked about enough. Like, Master Cyclonus is, like, this diminutive, like, 12-year-old nightmare girl who I just realized bears a suspicious resemblance to Harrowhark from Gideon and Harrow the Ninth, which might be why I like both characters so much. Anyway, it's funny for me to poke that button because I like narrowly avoid, like if I'd watched that show like 2 years earlier, it would have gotten its hooks in me bad. But as things stand, I was just like, oh yeah, this is pretty fun. I could see how that could that could hardwire the brain of like a child. And then I don't know, it's funny for me. And I think it would be interesting to unpack it and kind of figure out what exactly it did that, because, you know, it's kind of a cult classic. Like, it didn't really get mainstream success. It ends on a sequel hook, and then it just never got a second season, which is pretty common for cartoons in that era. And it could be interesting to, you know, standard issue, pick apart what makes it work, what maybe makes it doesn't. Anyway, it's cool. Let's see. I haven't watched Rings of Power yet. I have heard some promising things, and some less promising things, and a whole lot of yelling. I'm not going to make any judgments on the show without having watched it. I've learned. Yeah, I think, honestly, for me, the thing is, we still have the extended edition Lord of the Rings movies, and that's all I really need. Like, I think those are basically as close as you can get to a perfect movie, perfect series of movies, perfect 12-hour cinematic experience. So I don't need more of it. And when the Hobbit movies came out, that was also kind of my attitude. Like with the first one, I was like, yeah, there's like potential, but I don't think they can possibly do this well. And then they didn't. Because, well, we all know the sordid history. There's all those, there's video essays about it. The Lindsay Ellis one is extremely enlightening. But, yeah, she weren't a great set of movies. And the problem, I've said this before, the problem I had going into the Hobbit movies is that, The Hobbit is a book for children, and the Lord of the Rings series is not. It's, you know, it aged up with the audience of Tolkien's children. And with the changing world he was witnessing, you know? I just saw a post about this today, actually, that you have the Hobbit written after Tolkien comes back from World War I. And it's, you know, it's a story about a little country gentleman who goes out and has a crazy fucking adventure that's terrifying, and he feels very small in the face of these, like, gods and monsters walking the earth, and then he comes home and retires, basically. He's fabulously wealthy, and everyone thinks he's a bit weird, and everything's fine. And then, you know, years down the line, he sees what World War II does to the world, and he writes the Lord of the Rings series. But the problem is, you know, if you're making a prequel to Lord of the Rings, you don't write The Hobbit. You basically write the Silmarillion. So if you're trying to make the Hobbit movies, you basically have two options. And both of these options will let down a large portion of the audience who want to cultivate. Option one, you make it true to the book. You make it one movie, you give it kind of a goofy tone, you know, you let it have its moments of pathos and depth, but mostly you write it as what it is. You know, you don't deviate too far from Tolkien's original story because you don't have to. It's really good. You get the riddles in the dark thing. You have a great time with that. You basically just adapt the audiobook version that Andy Serkis read. And that means that all the people who go into it who want more Lord of the Rings are going to be like, this is boring. Why is nothing happening? Why is he asleep for the entire final battle? And the other option is you do what they did. You try and Lord of the Ringsify The Hobbit. You try and give it a grander, epic, sweeping tone, which isn't accurate to the story, and the story isn't designed to support that, especially not for 3 movies. So you end up with something that's kind of a mess that feels very tired of itself and tonally inconsistent, and like it's trying very, very hard to sort of draw on the former glory of the really good movies it's trying to be more of. The Lindsay Ellis video about it brought up that, like, they're reusing musical cues from Lord of the Rings, like, in situations where they just don't make sense, because that's not what they were originally intended for. And it just, overall, the thing feels kind of soulless and sad. Like, there are parts of it that I liked. There were parts that got a chuckle out of me. I will admit that as I was watching the second movie, I was like, really doesn't feel like they're going to be able to finish the book at this pace they're setting. And it was extremely funny to me when they introduced they tried to make up for Tolkien's general lack of powerful girl bossy female characters by introducing Tariel, the super cool. She's new and she's like an elf and a war lady and she kicks ass. And then they were like, and now she has to choose between these two cute boys. And of the two, of the seasoned dwarven warrior versus woofy hippie elf boy Legolas, which one do you think we're going to make the serious bad boy versus the nice guy? Just so many baffling creative decisions. So it's possible that if the Hobbit movies hadn't happened, I'd be watching The Rings of Power with no caveats. As things stand, I'm kind of doing my standard approach for shows I'm not sure about, which is I'm basically going to wait for the first season to be done, and then I'm going to see what it looks like they're doing from there, reassess if I want to watch it all in one go. Because, if they pull it off, I would love to see more stuff like original Lord of the Rings. And I'd love to see an adaptation of things in the vein of the Silmarillion that I can actually understand with my attention span. But, we'll see. We'll see. I don't know. I'm not going to judge it before I've watched it or even heard any sort of unbiased reviews or consensus. Anyway. Oh, yeah, the other thing that was very funny when the Hobbit movies started is I was looking at all the dwarves and, 11 of them are cartoon characters, and then Thorin and Keely are, boy band members with, the shortest beards possible, and I was like, interesting. I understand why they would sort of Aragornify Thorin, but I wonder why they're doing that with Keely. And then, oopsies, he's in a love triangle. Of course, there it is. I don't know. It's so funny. Oh, there was something about that. Oh, yeah, this is just a fun little, I guess that's how you say it. But when my dad read me The Hobbit when I was very little, he pronounced their names Phyli and Kyli. And in my name, that was just correct. So it was like Feely and Keely. I was like, that's not right. Someone call Peter Jackson. Oh, anyway, what are we talking about? Thoughts on, oh God, so many different things. Do you know Homestuck? Oh, buddy. I know it by reputation. I know it by 2 separate Sarah Z video essays about it. I didn't read it. In fact, I had the option to, and I seem to have dodged a bullet because here's the thing. I've read a lot of webcomics. I basically started reading Girl Genius before it was a webcomic, and then when it made the transition to being a webcomic, I read it there. And a lot of early webcomics were basically like that, 1 page at a time, 1 to 3 times a week, basically just like reading a serialized comic very slowly. And I believe I was at one point directed to Homestuck, and I went to the first page, and, it started off as like a kind of, it was like a 1 panel at a time sort of click-through flash game thing. And I didn't understand that. I didn't know what it was or how it was supposed to work. So I clicked through a little bit and I was like, I don't know what's happening. And I got bored and left. And then it was like a cartoon, like you walk out of the room, like, wonder what that was. And then there's just like an explosion behind the door and you're like, whoa, okay. So yeah, I got nothing. I know nothing about Homestuck, although I do know by reputation that every time I bring up a trope, someone will be like, yo, they did that in Homestuck. With the implication that, like, perhaps the idea is, yo, they originated that in Homestuck. And it's, the technical term for a story like that is trope overdosed, when a story has an awful lot of tropes in it. Anyway. Excuse me. Detective Pikachu. I watched Detective Pikachu. As mentioned, I was not a Pokemon kid, which I think put me in the rather interesting position of watching Detective Pikachu with no real nostalgia. And, it's fine. I think if you like Pokemon, it's a lot more fun. Which is not exactly the hottest take in the world. Oh, I wonder if I'll enjoy the high-budget live-action Pokemon movie if I don't like the charmingly goofy original version. But, I thought it was a fine, sweet movie with some cute stuff in it. But it didn't exactly shatter my world, let's see. Have you played Skyrim? I have played Skyrim. In fact, one of the first ways I played it, my cousins had it on their home system, and I played it there, and I was like, yo, this is so cool, and these graphics are astounding. But I ended up playing it on Steam on my home computer, but my home computer was a Mac, and it wouldn't run there, so I literally got like a PC emulator so I could run the game that I owned on the computer I also owned. And it almost perfectly worked, but all the water textures rendered completely opaque. So when I went underwater, I couldn't see anything. From the top of the water, you could see through to the bottom, but in the water, it was just this dark green overlay layer. Somewhere an opacity slider went wrong, which is fine. That only really impeded me when I was in that one like dwarf temple that started filling with water. But the other thing is that whenever I play a game like that, I run into this problem where if someone gives me a quest, I do it as soon as they give it to me. Because I'm like, well, I don't want to let this person down. This seems important. Which meant I ended up doing like the entire, is it Soulstime? Like the DLC area with like the Eldritch Lovecraftian dimension and the other Dragonborn guy. When I was hilariously underleveled for it. Like, all those goopy things from, like, the starting area were killing me in one hit, and I was, like, furiously Googling, like, what's the trick for killing these? And they were like, at this point, you should be able to kill them in a couple hits. And I'm like, I can't! And, of course, the cherry on top with that final fight is that when I'm fighting the other Dragonborn, first of all, his sequence in the final fight broke. There's a bit where he, like, hops on top of a dragon and then, like, recharges himself with some dragon souls and then comes back to fight you. But I didn't know that because he just kind of stayed on the dragon. So he was just orbiting around, and I was on this really high tower in the middle of fucking nowhere with no way down. And I was like, am I supposed to shoot him down with my limited supply of arrows? And I couldn't, so I had to restart the fight. And then when I finally killed him, his body clipped through the tower, so I couldn't even, like, harvest his stuff. And when I looked this up, they were like, this is a very common glitch. The end. So, yeah, Skyrim and me have a tumultuous relationship, but it is a lot of fun. Let's see. It's a good Bethesda Polish. Oh, God. Oh, no, the live-action Fullmetal Alchemist movie. Okay, so I haven't seen the second one. I know that there's stuff about the second live-action Fullmetal Alchemist movie, but I probably am not going to watch it because I saw the first one and I really didn't like it, and it was extremely disappointing to me because Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is, as I've stated, probably the best anime ever made, just in terms of front-to-back quality and polish level. And a lot of the plot is kind of like important, and then the movie like changes random shit. You know what? I don't trust myself to remember the exact events of that movie that made me so mad, so I'm not going to slander it, but I am going to look up the Wikipedia plot summary and see if I can read it aloud. Because I remember they did a few things where I was like, wait, that completely ruins the stuff they need to do later. Ooh, a 28% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's a tough sign. All right. Let's see. The problem is, like, when I saw the trailer, I was like, everyone looks fantastic. This is good. And then, it wasn't. Oh, boy. Let's see. Father Cornello, blah, blah, blah. Shout Tucker. Oh, right, yeah, they fucking kill Dr. Marco. Dr. Marco's really important later. He's, like, crucial to the plot after a certain point. I guess they get his notes, but even then, that kind of, like, his whole thing with Scar and, like, his sort of redemption arc and Scar refusing to kill him, because it's like, all right, yeah, killing you would be the easy way out. You're gonna atone, bitch, is, like, more interesting. But no, they just straight up kill him. Oh yeah, Tucker's around and then dies, I guess. Oh yeah, I think I kept waiting for Scar to show up, and he just fully doesn't, because I guess he's in the second one. And the thing about, right, I remember the part where I was like, God damn it. And it's they changed the circumstances of Maze Hughes' death and Mustang's like vengeance quest, which is an extremely important like through line of the entire show. And they sort of just speed ran it for the entire, through the first movie, which doesn't end with the, the ending of the story. It ends with other shit, which is fine. I think it ends with Mustang killing Lust. Who cares? But the thing with the death of Hughes is that, like, Envy, the shape-shifting homunculus, kills Maze Hughes in the shape of first, I want to say Lieutenant Maria Ross, and then as in the form of Hughes' wife, which is fucking brutal. That's why Envy's terrible, and I love them. But so initially, they're like, okay, Maria Ross is a really good scapegoat. We can just, like, frame her easily because, people saw her going there with Hughes and stuff like that. And to get Mustang off their trail, they're like, we're going to frame Maria Ross extra hard. And Mustang makes it look like he kills her in, like, a fit of rage. But actually, he basically smuggles her out of the country to safety. And it's a great establishing character moment. Because up until this point, he's just been kind of like a dickhead authority figure. And the audience doesn't really know him well enough to say for certain that he would never kill an innocent woman. So it's just a great moment of like, oh, we misjudged you. And then it's like, oh, we misjudged you again. Hooray. So basically what he learns from this is that whoever killed Hughes is like really sneaky and potentially kind of supernatural, and they really don't want him finding out who they are. So every time he confronts some of the homunculi or some of the government conspiracy, he's basically always like, are you the one who killed Maze Hughes? And Lust is like, not me, tee-hee, and then he kills her anyway for plot reasons. And he even asks like Fuhrer King Bradley, and Bradley's like, nah. And when he finally corners Envy, he's like, yeah, shapeshifter, is it, are you the one who perhaps killed my best friend? And Envy's like, tee-hee, sure did, in the form of his wife, no less. And Mustang's like, interesting, and then sets him on fire forever. And it's just this incredibly, like, important arc for him, that the journey of sort of coldly and quietly finding a way to get revenge is, like, fucking... It's driving him along the entire plot, but everyone is sort of wary because this whole thing about, like, the quest for vengeance is, like, it's not good. It's not good for him. There's even a great bit where, like, Mustang is sort of on the warpath, and, like, at this point, Scar, who was wholly motivated by a very similar kind of revenge when he's introduced, is, like, he's kind of mellowed out and is on team good guy now, and Ed is kind of like, Scar... This is a little uncomfortably familiar. What are your thoughts? And Scar's like, he's fucked, bro. So it's just incredibly important. And then basically when he makes the decision to not make the final blow and kill Envy, it completely destroys Envy's worldview about humans being selfish and cruel and determined to destroy each other and themselves. And it's just incredibly important. And the movie's like, we can probably fuck up all of this. So, like, they make it so that instead of framing Maria Ross, they frame Mustang. They make it so that so that Envy looks like Mustang when he shoots him. So that, like, Mustang is the killer. But that means Mustang knows right out the gate that there's some hinky shapeshifter bullshit going on. And then, like, when he's like, Envy's the one who did it, and, like, explodes him a whole bunch at the end, it's like, you haven't had 50 episodes worth of seething rage building up. We haven't seen him, like, slowly falling down this, like, kind of dark path while maintaining this veneer of respectability that is incredibly important to his development. And it's just like, they just don't get it. Why didn't they get it? I don't understand. Sometimes, you see an adaptation and you're like, things that I consider foundational to what makes this story work were things that you thought were, like, cosmetic. Kind of like anytime you have a movie where they're like, as long as Batman doesn't physically kill anybody with his own bare hands on a gun, it doesn't count. It's like, yeah, if you put the gun on your car and then you shoot someone with the car gun and then you hit them with the car part of the car gun, then it doesn't count as murder. Anyway, so that's why I didn't watch the second movie and was not surprised to learn that it was bad. Which is a shame because, it looked good. It looked like, they nailed a lot of the costumes and, a lot of the effects looked pretty solid. And here's the thing. I know everyone's like, all live-action anime movies are terrible. All of these adaptations are bad. There's never been a good one. But that's not true. We had 3 good ones. There are 3 live-action adaptations of Rurouni Kenshin, and they are really good. They look good. They sound good. The choreography is incredible. I know that we can be better. And Fullmetal Alchemist, like, it has magical components. You know, it's got alchemy. It's got complicated effects. Whereas Rurouni Kenshin is mostly all swordsman-y stuff. And it's like, okay, yeah, the character's like jumping 30 feet in the air and slinging around 500-pound chunks of metal that they're pretending are swords. Whatever, that's fine. But it's mostly sword fights, you know? You can kind of get away with, like, all right, this character's wearing a wig, and we do a little, like, shenanigans with some weird contact lenses for this weirdo. That's fine. Okay. I know it's more complicated with Fullmetal Alchemist, but getting the plot right is not the hard part of getting Fullmetal Alchemist right. Anywho. I haven't seen the live-action Yu Yu Hakusho. I desperately hope it's good. I'm not holding my breath for it, but I hope we get a second mark in the category of we don't need to fuck this up. It can be good, actually. Oh, let's see. Have I seen Atlantis the Lost Empire? Of course I've seen Atlantis the Lost Empire. It slaps. I love that movie. It's great, and I love how it has probably the highest body count of any movie short of Mulan. Any Disney movie, sorry, specifically. Thank you for reminding me to drink my tea. Oh no, what was... I've seen the occasional comment sneak through asking about Sonic the Hedgehog, and I guess the relevant question is, what part of the vast and sprawling canon of Sonic the Hedgehog would we be discussing? On account of how I'm only really familiar with 2 parts of it. Except for the memes. I am very familiar with the memes and the real-time fandubs and stuff. No, it's not turmeric tea. This is mint tea. It's a little bit oversteeped, but it's very soothing. Ah, the movies. I see you are people of taste as well. Yes, the Sonic the Hedgehog movies are weirdly good. Or as it's come to be known, just kind of, just good. It was really funny, because of course when the first one came out, there were no expectations. Like, there hasn't been a good Sonic game since, like, the first one. You know, there were some that were doing interesting things, but, like, it's just kind of a joke that, like, no Sonic games are good, and they're all kind of tire fires. And, like, yeah, people would be like, oh, yeah, there are comics. Oh, yeah, there was, like, the show. There were a couple shows. And, But a live-action Sonic the Hedgehog movie, everyone knew it was going to be awful. And when we saw, like, the trailer with ugly Sonic, and we were like, oh, God, what are you doing? It was like, okay, this is going to be a joke and a half. And then they were like, we hear you, and we're fixing it. And we're like, okay, I hope you're not exploiting any 3D animators or, modelers to do that. And they were like, oh, what? I can't hear you. We were too busy giving you exactly what you wanted. And then suddenly we got, like, a good-looking Sonic and, like, a really good Sonic movie that was just, like, extremely basic, very simple, like, an alone child who happens to be a super fast blue extra-dimensional hedgehog finds a family and a home and doesn't have to be alone anymore. And I was like, hell yeah. I mean, that movie was like, I know that in certain circles, sincerity is a little bit out of fashion. And, oh, cool, a super chat making me drink tea. That's extremely thoughtful. Thank you. But the thing is, like, Sonic the Hedgehog is a quippy character. It would be very easy to write him kind of lampshading stuff, of just like, oh, a giant robot, how original, tee-hee, the kind of joke that makes it seem like the character isn't invested in the story, and that kind of in turn makes the audience less invested in the story. And I was pleasantly surprised that they didn't do that, and instead they just kind of played all the things that could have been potentially goofy pretty straight. Sure, if anything, like, Robotnik was the one that was kind of making more jokes about shit, and I kind of like that because he's an asshole, and for him to not buy into the sincerity of the story is thematically very appropriate. But I could tell the part of the movie that I was like, all right, I'm fucking sold, is, like, right at the end, when it looks like Sonic might be dead, and, what the fuck is the cop's name? Donut Lord, but his actual name you know, the guy, when he's like, his name was Sonic, this was his home, and he was my friend, and it, like, makes Sonic go Super Saiyan. Well, like, not, you know, gold, but, you know, gives him his first of several friendship-induced power-ups. I was like, yes, fantastic. And then they were like, we're making a second one. And I was like, hell yeah, you are. And this one I went into knowing it was going to be good. And I was validated. Because as soon as they were like, we got Idris Elba as Knuckles, I was like, you understand what this is all about. Tom! His name is Tom. That's right. Thank you, everybody. Anyway. At this point, I like how it's just like, we're just, you know, Sonic is just adopting all the main characters from the other games, and they're all going to be best friends now. I have no idea if and how they are ever going to build up to the level of sheer insanity of cast size that is the Sonic IDW comics, where it's like the core cast is like a dozen people, and then they have so many random friends and sidekicks all over the place. I don't know if they can justify that without fully, like, sending them back to... do they have the rights to that dimension? You know, the main one where everyone is from, theoretically. But that's fine. I think as long as we get a really good voice actor for Shadow, I'll be fine. And we need some classic Crush 40 butt rock in that one. It's just not fair otherwise. Anyway, the Sonic movies are good. And unfortunately, some of the Sonic comics are also really good. And I'm verging dangerously close on having to unironically refer to myself as a Sonic fan. So, let's see. How do you think the next Sonic movie will portray Shadow compared to his original Sonic Adventure 2 counterpart? Do you have any concerns about it? Well, you see, I have not played Sonic Adventure 2, and most of my awareness of it comes from the cutscenes that show how really badly mixed the audio is. You know, the classic, I'll make you eat those words. So I'm not really worried that they'll do worse than that. But I do understand that Shadow's personality is a bit of a hot topic among fans on account of how it's kind of in flux, and sometimes he's just a straight-up bad guy, and sometimes he's a little more nuanced, and like in the IDW comics, he's a bit of a hubristic asshole who's not really allowed to have friends, and I know that some people are kind of upset about that because he can have more depth, but the problem is, like in all of his tie-in games, you know, when you get the chance to play as him, he is kind of truly ambivalent towards good and evil, and you're allowed to play him as a full-on, like, world-conquering dickhead, or basically just, like, a grumpy good guy. And if you have a game with multiple endings, and you're trying to make them all canon, the character that they apply to is going to come across as a little bit inconsistent. Let's see. I haven't watched, I haven't watched She-Hulk yet. It's also in the category of, like, once the first season is over, depending on what I hear about it, I might give it a shot. I'm not going to go off on this too far, because I don't have Blue or Indigo to rein me in. But since Infinity War and Endgame, there's been very little that Marvel has put out that's really, like, grabbed my attention. There have been some things, but it's almost always been, like, once a few episodes are out and I start hearing about it, and people are like, oh, they did this cool thing. I'm like, I'm interested in that specific cool thing. I'll watch it for that. So when WandaVision was airing, I think, didn't they do it first? That was like the first one. It was, you know, it was like, oh, it's a sitcom about two Avengers. Who'd watch that? Tee-hee-hee. And mostly I was like, one of them's already dead. And the way he died was stupid. So, like, whatever. But then when they were like, yeah, they're doing some really cool, like, creeping horror about what exactly is going on, and there's this big mystery for how much Wanda's involved, and I was like, okay, I like a creeping horror mystery. In unrelated news, I've started re-listening to the Magnus archives from the very beginning. So, basically, that one I kind of tapped into, like, 4 or 5 episodes in, because I was just like, oh, this sounds interesting, and I was right. It was interesting. And I kind of did the same thing with Moon Knight, where I was one of the people in the audience who was kind of like, is this going to be the first compassionate, non-villainized portrayal of dissociative identity disorder I've ever seen in fiction? And when the answer was yes, I was like, well, I gotta see what that looks like. And it was good. And that's why everyone agrees that, like, episode 5 is the real finale and episode 6 is the cleanup where they have to do the inevitable, evil giant robot Jeff Bridges fight. You know, the thing they do in every Marvel movie where it turns into a sky beam and everyone's smashing each other up through a CGI environment. But, you know, it was a really good character drama up until then. So I gave it a shot. And I've heard that Loki is good, but I haven't heard it with any associated details that have made me want to watch it. And also it has, like, you know, an open ending set up for sequel thing, which I'm not super about. Although I guess that makes sense for what Marvel is doing. What the fuck show were we talking about? Oh, She-Hulk, yeah. Kind of the same deal, is like, most of what I've seen people talk about with specific details from it has been points where the CGI isn't fantastic. And, like, you know, that's not exactly a deal breaker on the quality of the writing, obviously. It would be disingenuous of me, of all people, like, in the top 10 reboot stands worldwide listing to give something grief for not having top quality, top shelf CGI. But it's like, it's, as people have been discussing, it's a little bit indicative of, like, Marvel sort of requiring exorbitant amounts of work from CGI VFX studios without giving them time or compensation appropriate to that. And that just makes me sad to think about. So, oh, I don't know. I'm sure all right, someone keeps saying, Red, you're cutting. Is that the same guy? Oh, it's the same guy. All right, well, somebody let me know if the stream is going really off the rails, but seems fine on my end, and there's not a whole lot I can do if the internet's being whack. Let's see. All right, glad everything's fine. Have you seen the Marvel X-Men anime? No. I have not seen an X-Men anime, but that does sound pretty whack. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Chat's going so fast. Here's the thing. I know that there's interesting stuff in the Loki show, but I think this might just be my personal frustration with a thing that Marvel did a few times overall and didn't really seem to recognize an issue with, which is like, we're going to take a character who had a lot of interesting development, and then we're going to kill him for shock value. But we don't actually want to lose the character or the marketability, so we're going to introduce a time-displaced version or an amnesiac version of the character who's basically the same, except with none of their character development or interesting interpersonal relationships. And the fact that they've done this like 3 times with all the characters they killed in Infinity War and Endgame and then realized they probably shouldn't have done, except for Black Widow because they just gave her a solo movie and called it a day. It's like, I don't know. I don't understand why they think that's fine. Like, there's no ideological problem with it. It's just, it completely disrupts certain kinds of character-driven writing and certain strengths of it. In the same way that a time skip will disconnect your audience from the characters that they've been following pretty much linearly through the story, killing a character and then bringing back another version of the character who's the same but with none of their interesting character development or interactions with other characters is like, you're starting from minute 1, but you can't even really be interesting about it because we've already seen this play out, in most cases in a way that we liked. So it's like, oh, they gave Loki, they basically reset him to his portrayal in Avengers, where he was at his most classic villain. And then they were like, and then he has a vision of his future, and he's like, oh no, that's really sad, so I'm going to be a good person with a completely different personality now. And I just don't find that interesting, personally. So, yeah, I guess that's me. Although I did hear that some of the Loki variants were fun, and my dad was very fond of the bit where old Loki used his magic to recreate Asgard, because that's a very sweet, like, portrayal of... One of the things about Loki is that everyone likes to headcanon him with a more interesting and consistent personality than he had in the movies, for a number of reasons. But one of those is that, like, fairly supported by the movies, is that Loki is desperate for approval and loves Asgard and the people in it and just wants them to love him. And that's sweet and sad. And kind of giving old Loki this moment of glory of, like, not only is he alone and rejected in this, waste collecting dimension, basically, with nothing but other Lokis to keep him company, he's been booted out of his own timeline. Of course he's missing Asgard. And it's kind of sweet that as his big heroic sacrifice, he recreates in all its glory this place he's always loved that rejected him so much. But that's not our Loki, and then he immediately dies. So, like, hooray! Anyway, none of this is saying that these shows are, like, bad or without merit. It's just, it's not something that I particularly want to see, and that's fine. You know, this is also how I kind of go with the comics. A lot of different things in the comics are interesting, but it's kind of like a cost-benefit analysis of how much dumb shit do I have to wade through to get to the good shit. Let's see. There is a comic run for Loki that I read a while back that was kind of interesting. I don't know if they did anything with it afterwards. It kind of ended on a sort of open, little bit sad note. It was called Loki, Agent of Asgard, and I thought it was very funny because it seemed like a transparent attempt to, like, take comics Loki and give him more, like, youth appeal because that's the one where they were like, this isn't Loki, this is young Loki. He's hot now and has boyish good looks and kind of a better attitude, and he wants to be a good guy. And then the whole thing turned into just a very interesting exploration of the nature of divinity, and basically the conclusion he comes to is that, oh, you're Loki, you're the god of lies, everyone knows that you're evil, and he's like, what is a lie if not a story? And ends up sort of mentally rebranding himself as, like, I am Loki, god of stories, and gives himself a lot more freedom. Like, he starts, well, for one thing, this is part of the comic where he ends up kind of walking around as Femme Loki for a while, and just kind of like, yeah, when I get the chance to sort of self-determine who I want to be, my gender is significantly more flexible, and I just thought that was really interesting. I think it also had just like a full-on canon ace protagonist, which might have been what originally drew me to it. Anyway, interesting comic run, but like a lot of good comic runs, it was pretty short, and then it kind of ended, and then all the characters got passed off to other writers who didn't necessarily handle them the same way I liked in this story, which is kind of what they're doing with the MCU. So it's like for a while they were doing something the comics weren't, and now they've sort of circled back to doing the exact same pitfalls that screw over the comics so much that there are way too many cooks, and you can like an individual run fine, but that's no guarantee that you'll like the run that comes after it or what they do with the character in the future. And that's been a problem since minute one. This isn't new. It's just, I think when you're making movie adaptations, you have the opportunity to get a much smaller, much more cohesive writer's room that can all actually agree on what they're doing with these characters across different movies. And they just didn't really do that. And that's, you know, it's how it is. Individual parts of it are still quite good. Let's see, it was WandaVision, Moon Knight. I feel like I'm forgetting one that I watched. I might just be mixing it up with KENOBIIIII and Mandalorian, which I also watched on recommendation. Anyway, that's enough of me sassing. Let's see. Oh no, is someone bringing up Death on the Nile? God. I don't know. Do we really want to make this stream just me complaining about stuff? I mean, it can be. All right. Just this one Death on the Nile thing. And also Murder on the Orient Express. Here's the thing. Kenneth Branagh gets a lot of flack. I don't mind him. I didn't mind the Harry Potter movie he directed when I had no reason to mind that franchise in general. I didn't mind the Thor movie that almost everyone else was like, this is dumb and weird, and he tilts the camera too much. Like, yeah, he does. It's fine. I liked a lot of those Shakespeare adaptations he did, even though he always cast himself as the lead. I think that, you know, he's pretty much fine, and he's just having a good time, and I don't begrudge him that. But I saw the warning signs in Murder on the Orient Express that when Kenneth Branagh cast himself as Poirot, he wanted to make a few modifications. And it's understandable for an actor to sort of want to personalize a role and to perhaps want to make some changes so that they like the character they're playing a little bit more, and that's not a crime. But I think of all the characters that are great detectives, Hercule Poirot is the one that should never be made an action star with a tragic backstory and a dead wife and the ability to use a gun and a chase sequence through collapsing scaffolding. Because that's what I think of when I think of a small, portly gentleman who really likes food and has a cane. I think that guy probably runs a lot. So it wasn't too bad in Murder on the Orient Express. There were a few parts where I was like, what the fuck? And one of them is the bit where he gets everybody out and he's like, I have, how you say, an extremely black and white worldview of what is right and wrong, but in this specific case where the guy you murdered was a serious dick, I find myself questioning my place in reality. So you're all gonna sit here and I'm gonna point a gun at you and you're gonna like tell me the shit that went down and stuff. And I personally don't think that feels like a very Poirot move. But honestly, I feel like the main strength of that movie was not supposed to be Poirot. It was supposed to be the huge guest star cast and letting all of them show off a little bit and stuff like that. But it was kind of a warning sign of things to come, because when Death on the Nile came along, it kind of had the same premise of like everyone here is a super cool guest star and all that jazz. But the big warning sign for that movie for me was the opening scene where a younger Poirot is in a military hospital after a brief intro scene where we see him use his powers of deductive reasoning to help his squad get across a battlefield unharmed, you see. And his commander turns around to compliment him and then is blown up by an artillery shell. And it's not supposed to be funny, obviously. And then he's in a war hospital, and his wife, she comes to see him, and he's like got his face fully turned away from her, like the whole shot. And I was like, if he turns around and reveals that he's been horribly scarred by the explosion, I'm gonna freaking lose it. And obviously I was right. And he's like, you would still love me even if I look like this? And she's like, you'll just have to grow a mustache. And it's like, haha. But also, that doesn't at all cover the parts of his face that were fucked up. So that's a bad start. That's an inauspicious way to open your Poirot movie. And then the other thing with Death on the Nile is that, like, I hadn't read the book in a while. I didn't remember the twist. It's not as easy to remember as it is, as the Orient Express one is. But the thing is, they kind of did that thing where they were like, oh, everyone here is a suspect, except for that one guy. He could not possibly have done the murder because he was too injured by that really kind of weirdly contrived fight that happened between him and that girl who's been stalking him or something. And I was like, so it couldn't have been, it specifically couldn't have been that guy. I feel like it was probably that guy. And obviously, yeah, it was that guy. It was the lady's husband who was conspiring with the lady who was stalking them. So that they could like kill her and take her fortune, and then they could run off together. I guess fucking spoiler alert. I'm sorry, it's been a long week. But anyway, it was like they didn't quite do enough to convince me that, he could not possibly have done the murder. So I was like, all right, I think he probably did the murder. And it's a little bit weird that Poirot's not really thinking of that. And then if you thought that one gun involved in the finale was bad, and this one, we got a full-on Mexican standoff. Everyone's got a gun. This one lady who established, she has like a full Chekhov's gun thing. She's like always wearing a slightly unfashionable hat. And then she takes it off and there's a gun in the hat. And she's like, it's a dangerous world out there, Mr. Poirot. And he's like, I understand. I also enjoy using guns and shit. So in the finale, it's like, everyone's pointing a gun at everybody else. This is exactly what I wanted from my detective fiction. Yeah. So that movie wasn't good. I think the only good thing in it was actually a minor change from the book. Basically, there's a minor character. It's one of those like anthology series where characters will sort of dip in and out. It'll be like Poirot will have a friend in one book, and that character won't necessarily show up again. And one thing they did is that they had a friend of his who was like in the Murder on the Orient Express movie. He was just like one of the guys on the train, and he's like, "Oh, by Jove, old man, I can't believe there's been a murder on this train. How crazy." And then in this one, he turns up, and he basically just replaces a minor character in the Death on the Nile. And the plot twist is that is the second character who gets killed, I believe. No, maybe the third. But swapping that from being just some rando to basically still just some rando, but a guy that Poirot actually knows and likes, was kind of cool. That was like a good little bit of, oh, okay, we're adding more personal stakes to this in a way that doesn't involve everybody pointing guns at everybody else. Yeah. So those movies weren't super fun for me. Oh yeah, Book. Thanks, chat. It was Book. Yeah, I've seen other Poirot adaptations that are a lot truer to the book. And obviously they're slower paced and there are a lot fewer guns. But I kind of like that. I feel like it's similar to when people write subversive Superman stories where the twist is, what if Superman acted like every single supervillain? And it's like they don't even realize that they're just subverting what is already a subversion, and they just get it back to where they started, and they don't realize they've walked back into a cliche. I feel like taking Agatha Christie's detectives, who are all purposefully designed to not at all be what the trope of the detective was at the time, and then being like, okay, yeah, cool, but what if they were more like emotionally damaged and like brilliant and they used like guns and shit? And it's like, oh, good job. Okay. Yeah, you took Sherlock and Watson and you put them into one guy, and then you were like, this guy is my brand new idea. Anyway, there's good stuff in those movies. I sass because I wanted them to be good, but I didn't really expect them to be good. They weren't. Sorry, person in chat. I'm about to finish Columbo. Where do I go now to get my fix after I finish the show? Just restart it? Honestly, that's been my strategy. Columbo is so long that you can kind of get some mileage out of restarting it, but it's good to like take a hot minute. Let's see. Well, lots of people were bringing up Kenobi. I really liked Kenobi. Do we have anything specific about it? What I liked about Kenobi is that when it started, I was like, they are really limited in their options here. Because, of course, like most people, when I saw the first movie, like the first movie, and Vader goes, when I left you, I was but the learner. Now I am the master. And then we saw the prequels. We all assumed that when I left you is referring to when you cut all my arms and legs off and set me on fire. And it's like, yeah, that was pretty humiliating. But the fact that Kenobi was like, we're bringing in Darth Vader. They're gonna face off against each other. And in fact, when they established from the beginning that Kenobi didn't know Vader was alive and was in fact really depressed and cut off from the Force, it was like, okay, this has potential because we need to see how this version of Kenobi turns into the version of Kenobi we recognize from the original trilogy. And that was an interesting actual concept because this is kind of a difficulty that a lot of stories run into when they write essentially interquels. Like, if you write a prequel, you know what the end point has to be, but you still have a lot of leeway. You know, they can introduce whole new characters as long as they're not too important by the time the original series rolls around. You know, they could do Clone Wars and they could drop in Ahsoka, and they never even had to kill her because, like, just because she doesn't show up in the original series doesn't mean she's not out there somewhere. Space is pretty big. So then you run into this situation where it's like, all right, you can draw a straight line from the end of the prequels to the beginning of the original series, and you can just kind of interpolate what probably happens. Or you can take that window of time and you can write an actual story in it where things happen that you don't necessarily expect. So the idea that Obi-Wan would become extremely depressed and stop actively helping people was not what I was expecting. It's not what I would have put in the straight line between the end of the prequels and the beginning of the original trilogy. But the idea that Obi-Wan fully believed Anakin was dead actually made a lot of sense. And I thought that that was actually a very interesting starting point because then that meant that we had a new arc to write out. And it did basically what I thought it would do. And I mean that as a compliment. Oh, sorry, chat can tell that my throat's getting a little bit sore. Yes, I will drink some tea. I have drunk the tea. Anyway, Kenobi. So basically, it was an interesting way to start the series. This is a Kenobi that you barely recognize, but he does make sense. And basically, in the space of the 6 episodes, I was like, all right, they need to get him to the point where we once again believe he will, of his own accord, become the character we recognize from the original trilogy. He's going to need to reconnect with the Force, rediscover his desire to help people, stop being so subtle about being a Jedi to the point where he can whip out a lightsaber in the cantina and it won't feel completely weird. All right, we can make this work. And the other thing is I was like, he's going to need to beat Vader at least one more time. Because otherwise, the tone of their fight in the original doesn't make sense anymore. If their last encounter was Vader thoroughly spanking Obi-Wan, then his tone would not have been, when I left you I was but the learner. It would have been like, you ready for round 2, old man? So when Kenobi gets kind of thoroughly wrecked in that one episode, in the scene that actually I think made me interested in watching because people were like, oh my God, Vader's like a horror movie monster in this episode. It's great. I was like, I love that. I love that for him. Because Vader's scariness in the original trilogy is present, but it's a little bit informed, especially because we all sort of know that he's going to end up fine. Like, he's going to turn good in the end and all that jazz. So when we're watching it, we're like, yeah, he's scary, but he's not going to do anything too bad. And then I think the turning point for a lot of us was in Rogue One, the one bit where he just wrecks shop down the hallway and it's not even effort for him. And we're like, oh my God, he's so scary. That kind of gave us a glimpse of what Vader was to everybody else. And I loved that. And then Kenobi was like, we're going to do more of that. And I was like, yes. So basically, the arc that I saw that made sense for Kenobi was, okay, he needs to sort of reconnect with the Force, and he took his sweet time, but he got there, and he needs to rediscover his hope for, people and the future of the Galactic Republic or whatever, and he needs to beat Vader. And we got all of those things, and I was like, good, I'm pleased. That's basically it for what I was expecting to play out, and I'm glad we got it because after he got beat by Anakin, I was like, that's pretty good. I like that stuff. Also, the flashback to the Jedi Temple was like, I saw a lot of people who were like, the nostalgia that just destroyed me. And I don't have that much nostalgia for the prequels. I didn't watch them when I was at a nostalgia-forming age. But I was like, oh man, they really know how to really tug on the emotional heartstrings for this. And then the reveal that was Anakin remembering it was like, yes, good. Their dynamic is so much more heartbreaking, and I'm glad that they got to flesh this out, because if you just go with the original prequels, it's like, yeah, Obi-Wan and Anakin have a dynamic, but it is a little hindered by the bad writing. And then you watch Clone Wars and you're like, they have a dynamic. It's good. It's a little hindered by its attachment to canon. And you watch the original trilogy, and yeah, they have a dynamic for about 5 minutes, and then Obi-Wan gives a little smirk and disappears. The end! But this really let them kind of tap into the most gut-wrenching part of their dynamic after what they both perceive as a profound betrayal. And I loved how they sort of used it to, at the last minute, be like, tee-hee-hee, you didn't kill Anakin, I did. And I was like, ha, yeah, that's the good stuff. That's a nice way to validate that from a certain point of view thing. I'm sorry, someone's asking for a swatting. All right, that guy gonna behave? All right, cool. Anyway, and I liked Reva. I thought she was really cool. I thought my dad figured out the thing about her being a youngling before I did. When we were watching through it, he was, because, in hindsight, it makes perfect sense, because it was like, why would they show that scene in the Jedi Temple from that perspective unless that perspective was going to come back? Like, yeah, it was scary and sad, and it was contextualizing generally stuff about the show, but it's like, if you're showing specifically the younglings trying to get out, that's planting. You got to pay that off later. Although I got to say, it is a little bit weird that, like, getting stabbed in the stomach just doesn't seem to affect people in the Star Wars universe anymore. Like, I know that they can heal and shit, but, Like, first in Mandalorian, when they killed, Fennec? Yeah. They shot her, and then they were like, wait, she's really cool, bring her back. And they were like, oh yeah, we got some, like, droid bits in there. Don't worry about it, she's fine. Anyway, but yes, I think that the arc of Reva sort of like going from youngling to Sith, just trying to climb the ranks till she could kill Vader, and the reveal that Vader knew the whole time really makes him so much worse in very interesting ways. But that sort of retroactively highlights how his turn from the dark side was actually kind of an impressive feat of willpower, rather than just like, all right, man, clock's ticking. When you gonna stop being evil? Anyway, yeah, I really liked Kenobi. I kind of hope they don't give it a second season that they use to spin off a shit ton more stealth pilots like they did with Mandalorian, but that's because I'm happy with what I got. But if they give us more stuff that I also like, I will not complain. Okay, yeah, good point. Darth Maul did fully survive getting cut in half, so I guess getting, like, shot in roughly the same area isn't necessarily a deal breaker. It's just a little bit funny because when the Inquisitor got ganked in that episode, everyone was like, ugh, Kenobi's totally breaking the canon. That character has to be alive later. It's like, so it's not, so he's gonna be fine. And then they were surprised when he turned up fine. And it's like, yeah, we know he was gonna be fine. I guess they could have, like, cloned him Snoke style and it would have been fine too. Okay. Let's see. Knives Out. I also really like Knives Out. What specifically are we talking about with it? Because it was fun. I don't know. It was a good movie. I liked the cinematography, and I liked how they did like some complicated software to mimic the effect of light wrap that you get on, like, old film, where light sources bloom a little bit beyond their confines, which you don't get on digital cameras because they just kind of do, like, pixel by pixel. I know what that pixel looks like, et cetera, et cetera. But they wrote software to make it look like old-timey film, which I thought was extremely cool. The detective Benoit Blanc, I thought he was a very fun, I guess, relic of a previous genre. Again, I think a lot of people are sort of rediscovering the benefits of, like, sincerely executing tropes that they might think are a little bit overdone, because the sort of, you know, large cast Clue style whodunit, with a quirky detective trying to figure it out, it feels like it should be too cliched to work. But I am kind of glad that there's sort of this idea now in a lot of creators that, like, you do not need to work with an original concept all the way down. This is coming out more backhanded than I intend. I genuinely think that the execution of a story is significantly more important than how fresh it looks on paper. I think that, you know, a simple meal well made can be an incredibly solid thing. And if you look at Knives Out, the main unique thing is the structure of how the reveals are paced out. If you put the story on paper, it's like, all right, rich old man, large family, lot of potential suspects. Who did it? It's a whodunit and all that jazz. The main twist is that for the first part of the movie, we are mostly following, you know, the detective. And then for the middle third of the movie, we are following who did it, kind of. And then for the back third, it's like, actually, she thought she did it, but she didn't. And that is interesting. That's a little bit new. But overall, the structure of the story is extremely classic. The vibe of the detective is pretty classic. Every character in there is a different kind of stereotype. But it worked really well. It had a lot of sincerity, and it was extremely interesting. And I'm glad we're getting more of it, because I'm actually confident that they can do more of it in a way that's good. People keep bringing up Lupin the Third. It's also good, I guess, but it's mostly a series of movies, and I've only seen some of them. Well, I'm going to take this opportunity to drink some of this tea. Oh boy, she's really flying. Oh, Arcane. Yes, give me an excuse to talk more about Arcane. Um, favorite character. I mean, I'm kind of a basic bitch. I really like Vi. But I think I've talked about this before somewhere. What really impressed me about Arcane was that it never took the easy road in making interpersonal conflict make sense. Because that's a frustration I have with a lot of storytelling. It's a hand of the author situation. Sometimes for the purposes of the plot, the writer needs two characters to hate each other or to fight. I mean, my go-to example for movies that don't do this well is Batman v Superman. We need these two characters to hate each other and fight. So we're going to basically just make that happen, regardless of what makes sense. And that's, that happens a lot. It's not just a Batman v Superman thing, but it does happen a lot because it can be difficult to make two characters who, under normal circumstances, would get along, realistically dislike each other. That can actually be quite tough. And the thing with Arcane is that, of course, it's tied with the League of Legends lore. A lot of these characters have extremely ingrained character allies and enemies, And a lot of them are introduced as best friends to each other. Vi and Powder, later Jinx, are, fully on opposite sides in the lore of the game. They don't really hate each other exactly, but they do fight a lot. Vi and Caitlyn are full-on partners, so they're pretty much destined to get together. But Jace and Victor are mortal enemies who fully do hate each other in the lore of League, as far as I understand it. And there were so many points in the story where I was like, I'm sorry, person in chat, you absolutely have to read the novel of Murder on the Orient Express. Don't watch the new movie if you want to get the mystery impact. Don't do it. Anyway, Arcane. There were a lot of points where I was like, this is going to be it. This is going to be what they use to justify why they hate each other forever. That's going to be the thing. We're going to, okay, I guess infinite Arcane spoilers to follow. At the end of episode 3, when Powder's heartbreaking plan to rescue them goes awry in classic Greek tragedy way, the best laid plans with the best of intentions go catastrophically wrong, drives a wedge between the sisters, and I was like, this is going to be it. This is going to be why they hate each other forever. And then within moments, they're like, no, actually, this is one moment of terrible emotional distress leading to weakness, and Vi tries to get back to her immediately, and then through no fault of her own is grabbed and slung in jail forever, leaving Powder in Silco's hands. And you're like, okay, all right, that's interesting. That's more interesting. Now this is kind of layered. Vi clearly wants to make things right, but maybe Powder's gonna hate her forever. And it kind of looks like they're doing that, but what they actually end up doing in the second batch of 3 episodes is that Powder/Jinx isn't entirely sure what she wants, because she's a very troubled and confused person, and has a lot of conflicting feelings about her sister, who she thinks abandoned her but then learns didn't, which is quite interesting because, again, it was an easy route to conflict that they actively stymied. They were like, we're not going to do this. We're going to do something else instead, something more interesting. And even after Jinx did all that other shit, Vi is still like, we're still sisters and I still love you. I just, I want to make this better. I want to help you. But what we have there is a fundamental miscommunication of desire. Vi sees Jinx as her failure. She sees it as her failing to protect Powder. Jinx sees Jinx as who she really is. So, this is a much more deep-seated and complex reason for them to dislike each other, or at least to have conflict. In the, I'm trying to save you from yourself, you can't save me from what I actually am, why can't you accept me, is a much more interesting kind of conflict to have between these characters. I don't know what they're going to do with Jason Victor. I feel like that's going to be a season 2 thing, because I was kind of expecting it to be like, oh, I can't believe your experiment killed our plucky lab assistant. Oh, whatever. But the vibe I get from their current dynamic is that if Victor is like, Jace, the only way for me to save my life, everything's coming out French today, is to indulge in slightly unethical experiments that are potentially dangerous for me. But I think Jace would be like, if that's the only way, you know, be safe, I'll help you out, but we're going to make this work and save your life, buddy. So it's probably not going to be that. Anyway, I don't know. Again, a League of Legends show has no right to be this good. And I'm continually impressed by it. And the piece of writing about it that I like the most is how it avoids that kind of forced conflict, how it goes out of its way to let the characters try and actually be smart about things. They try and resolve their conflicts without immediately going like, I hate you forever, let's fight and I'll kill you or something. Like, they let the characters act like people who don't want to lose these people that they value, which is a thing that forced interpersonal conflict stories often don't do. So I really like it, and I am also excited for, oh god, what's his name? There's a character in League who's like a reanimated zombie werewolf. And it is at this point pretty much confirmed that he's going to be in season 2 or at least in later stories. And his origin is Warwick. Yes, thank you, chat. I knew you'd come through. Warwick. And it's funny because like when the first 3 episodes dropped, there were people who were theorizing that Warwick's origins were in those episodes. And the thing is, the League roster is so fucking massive that I don't know how any of these people pick anything out, but they were like, oh, this guy's like a zombie reanimated werewolf who was once kind of a thug, and the scent of blood drives him into a frenzy, and he goes and kills killers, and he has these weird broken memories of a little girl, and it's like, huh, okay, because, you know, Arcane introduced a bunch of characters that aren't, like, League champions, so it's like, well, these guys are either fucked or they're gonna not end up being super important. And I had forgotten the third possibility, fucked in a way that turns them into a League champion. Anyway, the really funny thing about Arcane, to me, has been all the people who were like, I don't play League. Will I understand Arcane? And it's like, not only will you understand Arcane, you shouldn't play League. Oy. Anyway, let's see. Red, do you play League? I played League for 1 week. I don't have the constitution for it. A friend of mine in college basically kind of gently strong-armed me and a few others in our dorm into it because she needed like a team that she could rely on. And I wasn't super good at it. And the thing with League is that once you lose once, the guy who killed you gets better at killing you specifically, which is a term called feeding. And I had one particularly bad game where I was in the middle lane and I got killed and then I got killed again and I got yelled at for feeding, but nobody came to help me. So, and this friend pointedly thanked everyone but me for trying. And I was like, okay. So, now the other thing that you must know about me is that when I am being bullied, whether in a friendly light or not, I don't snipe back. I kind of shut down. I'll swap barbs and sass with friends who I know the tone of, but if I think someone is actually mad at me, I don't really lash back exactly. I kind of try and defuse or get quiet. And this person, I say this with all the love in my heart, rather abrasive personality, very much purposefully so. But when it came to a situation where I was like, I've actually upset this person, she was her standard level of abrasive, and I just kind of got quiet and upset. And it was just a recipe for disaster. So League is not a fun game. It has potentially fun things in it, but it's a very volatile thing. And if you don't really have the stomach for getting just nonstop bombarded with shit like that, you're not gonna have fun. Anyway, let's see. I still haven't watched Monkey Kid. I've just been busy. I know it's really good, guys. I'm sorry. Let's see. Drink more tasty tea. I didn't read Rager's Apprentice, and I don't know what it is. Sorry. Of course I haven't watched Morbius, guys. It won't be funny if I watch Morbius. Oh, but I will say, if you have not already subscribed to Indigo's Patreon, Indigo's Patreon is, I believe, let me just check. I think she just has it under her name, actually. If she gets 100 patrons, she has to watch Morbius and do a Moviestruck episode on it. So now's your chance. She was at 80 last time I checked. Let's just see. Please hold while I scroll down for where I retweeted this. Yes, the Moviestruck Patreon. If she gets 20 more, she has to watch Morbius. Don't tell her I sent you. She'll figure it out anyway. But yes, true Morb heads don't watch Morbius, as we all know. I also saw Sarcastic Horus in chat bringing up Fantasy High, which I really liked. It's the first season of Dimension 20, which is the College Humor affiliated / Dropout affiliated D&D game run by Brendan Lee Mulligan. Fantasy High is, I think, the first one they did, and it's fun. It's like a very wild... It's the kind of urban fantasy that is like, what if we took a Tolkien-esque fantasy world and pulled it into a semi-modern era, technologically wise. So, you know, all the main characters are like, you know, half-orcs and dwarves and tieflings and stuff like that, and they're going to high school, Adventurer High School. And I'll be honest, I personally had a little trouble with it because, just because of the tonal whiplash. In my head, and this is ridiculous for a D&D game, in my head, the fact that they were students made me feel like they shouldn't be put in life-threatening situations or be expected to kill anything. And it's a D&D game. That's obviously the whole point. But just like at the time I was watching it, I was like, I don't think these children should have to kill, especially not like other people in their age group. But you know, that's kind of the fun of it. It was like, it was undercutting. It was a lot of classic high school drama tropes with the veneer of also it's a D&D game and setting, so a lot of murder happens. And it's also interesting because, like, behind the scenes, there's a lot of wild stuff about, I think this was the first time Brendan had run a game for this crew, and Brendan Lee Mulligan is a spectacularly good DM, but he does often open himself up to things that might potentially derail a less experienced DM's campaign completely, and sort of opens up opportunities to screw himself over because he thinks that the thing would be cool. Essentially, the improv yes and impulse lets him sometimes let things happen where maybe that kind of damages the integrity of the campaign. And in Fantasy High, like, the gang kept killing people with vital quest information before they got to say that information. And the first fight of the campaign, 2 of the players, like, fully died, and he had to kind of real quick be like, all right, here's how a teacher is going to resurrect you both by dying himself. And it's like, okay, cool. And it's very funny because it's honestly kind of a masterclass in, like, re-railing a story, like getting it back on the rails. But there's a few parts where you can kind of see the cracks of like, okay, he really had to get this to work. It's a very interesting experience. I think especially if you're interested in DMing, it's worth a watch just to kind of see like what it was like before he got this group like fully polished, sort of, before they all got really on the same page for what they were doing. There's also an extremely funny bit where they just kind of derail the episode and just like go to hang out with a bunch of high elves. And it's just like 20 minutes straight of Brennan dunking on like Tolkien style, completely divorced from reality, completely immortal elf beings. Anyway, it's a lot of fun. It has a season 2 that I haven't listened through yet. I'm gonna, because it's cool and I like it. But honestly, the Dimension 20 season closest to my heart is The Unsleeping City, because it's set in New York City, baby! And I gotta rep that shit. That is the flavor of urban fantasy I tend to prefer. I don't mind, like, high fantasy, but we sort of pulled it into, like, everyone's got cell phones and shit. But I really like secret world urban fantasy in settings I'm familiar with. Oh, man. Oh, and another fun example of like Brendan Lee Mulligan sort of screwing over his own campaign by just letting fun shit happen is gotta be Escape from the Bloodkeep, which is a mini season of Dimension 20. Pardon me while I drink more tea. Basically, there are many things in Bloodkeep that conspire to sort of take it off the rails. One of them is that of the 3 major combat encounters in the campaign, all of them have falling as an instant death condition, basically, or like an instant loss condition. Because one of them is in an active volcano, one of them is in a series of airships over open sky, and one of them is in a crumbling, like, dais of evil over an infinite void that if you fall into, you fully die. Which means the strategy in every fight, you know, players will tend to gravitate towards the most efficient method of killing their enemies. So the players in every single fight gravitated to, how can we fling people over the side most efficiently? And that meant, like, taking out some of the heavy hitters shockingly quickly in some of those fights. And of course, also, the idea of the campaign was that it was all supposed to be PvP. They're an evil party. They are like the lieutenants of Definitely Not Sauron, potentially in the running to become the new Dark Lord of Evil. But the great thing is, if you watch it, you can see the exact moment when Brennan's campaign, like, shrivels up and dies because they all decide that they're best friends. And it's in the first episode. They're making their way to the chambers of Definitely Not Sauron, and a couple of them just had an awkward encounter with, like, the war chief of the orc army, who basically, when I first saw him, I kind of assumed he was supposed to be framed in a slightly sympathetic light, because basically his deal is that, like, he runs the orc armies, but because he's not in the in-group, he's not one of the PCs, he doesn't get invited to the important meetings. And he's like, you know, we do a lot of heavy lifting, we do a lot of, like, hard work on the ground, and it's just a little bit weird that, like, I don't get to, you know, I don't get to really say my piece. And I was like, ooh, are they setting up, like, a thing about, like, like maybe the forces of evil are a little bit, like, classist against the orcs? And Trap's character at one point is like, there's some kind of populist revolution happening down there, and it's extremely accurate to what the plot is. But though he's framed in a slightly sympathetic light, from my perspective, he's also a bit of a dick to them, because the 2 characters he talks to are, like, not Sauron's girlfriend and, like, the human pirate captain who's basically contracted out to help. And he's like, you know, neither of you are really loyal to the Dark Lord like I am. And it's just like, ooh, buddy, ooh. And then when the whole team kind of assembles to go in to meet with the Dark Lord, they're all just kind of, like, commiserating over how much they fucking hate that guy. And they're all just becoming best friends, commiserating over that one fucking coworker that they can't stand, who's way too intense. And I was like, oh yeah, this is the moment when the PvP plans shriveled and died for sure. So, highly recommend. It's very funny. And Matt Mercer's a player, so if you're really only into Critical Role, you get to see a rare situation where he gets to play as a character who is screwed over by such bad rolls that he becomes an absolute medic loser, and it's really funny. Oh boy. On the subject of Dimension 20 and Brendan Lee Mulligan, I've seen EXU Calamity get brought up, which is the 4-episode guest campaign miniseries for Critical Role that is DM'd by Brendan Lee Mulligan, that is essentially playing out the events of the Calamity. And I love it so much. It's a tough watch in places, but man, I adore it. I think it took me like a week to get through all 4 episodes, because I kept like pacing myself. It's just, man, I don't know. It's really, really good. It's a kind of story that I always love. I guess with the exception of the Star Wars prequels. Basically, anytime you have a situation where it's like, we in the future know that this is like so thoroughly ruined that we barely know what happened, you know? Like disaster documentaries, but with the benefit of being fictional and not kind of uncomfortably real. So it's like, well, I guess it's kind of like if you're watching a thing about Pompeii, you know how the story's going to end, but nobody in the story does because the thing that goes wrong is so unprecedented. And I'm not super familiar with the setting of Exandria and Critical Role. Like, full disclosure, I have tried to watch through a lot of Critical Role, and I can't do it. It's not paced right for my brain to click into. So I pick up some stuff from, like, Wiki Walks occasionally. I obviously watched Legend of Vox Machina, and I really liked it. But, like, the lore of the setting is really interesting to me. And from what I gathered, basically all that was known is that in the background of the world, there was a thing called the Calamity that killed 2/3 of the population of the world. And it was basically this divine war between the prime deities, I think, and the betrayer gods. So it's a war between the gods, and it ends with the gods being like, all right, we can't stay here, and they all move off plane, which is why they aren't just around to help out. And that's cool. But what that means is that, like, if you set a story in the Calamity, you have so much creative freedom because nobody knows what the fuck happened, basically. Like, they know the big stories, but they don't know the specifics. And so the premise was like, you are in a city that is going to be destroyed so thoroughly that nobody in the future knows its name. And you are all people who are important in this city, and you are going to be destroyed so thoroughly that nobody in the future knows your name. Let's go! And it's like, yes, I am here for this poignant tragedy. And it's really funny because all the players are like, I am here to die spectacularly. Let's fucking go. Except for Travis, who's like, I'm gonna live, bitches. And I think in the like wrap-up roundtable when they discuss it, Abria mentioned that she created a character who's an absolute tank of a wizard so that she could, like, have enough hit points and spell slots to survive. And then Travis was like, we're gonna be on a floating city? Okay, I'm playing a bird with a fly speed. And he makes it. Spoiler alert. But this is also a show that I waited until it was done to watch. Because I think if I hadn't, I would have been too stressed about individual moments of potential victory or defeat. Like, I kind of personally needed a certain amount of spoilerage before I was willing to subject myself to that. And knowing that Travis's character got out alive was kind of what I needed. Because I was like, okay, all right, fantastic. It's not all going to be for nothing. And there were so many really interesting things in it. And I think one of the things that I really liked about that series is that, you know, when you start the series, and for those who just came in, we're talking about EXU Calamity, the Critical Role miniseries run by Brennan Lee Mulligan, 4 episodes, really good, extremely heavy. One thing that I thought was cool about it is that because the expectation was a spectacular TPK, the rules of engagement were a little bit different, you know? Like in a standard D&D game, the DM might pull some punches or potentially fudge some things to not kill everybody, you know? The challenges the heroes will be faced with are usually things that they can kind of handle. Because the DM could do a rocks fall, everybody dies, but it's not sporting. And if you drop a TPK on players that aren't prepared for it and haven't in some way earned it, that tends to be a failure on the DM's part. At least that's often how they think of it. But if everybody knows they're doomed, it's kind of like when you go into a game of Call of Cthulhu. Like, you know everybody's fucked, and that's half the fun. So Brennan could do shit that he doesn't do in other campaigns. Lots of shit. Very crazy shit. That makes me kind of glad he can't do it in other campaigns. But the other thing that I liked about it is how it sort of played with your expectations. Because the very first scene of this game is like a 20-minute oracular dream about how everything is going to shit and the city is going to fall. And then the entire rest of the first episode is like champagne and parties and high society and everything is great. And the unofficial tagline of the show is, it's 1979 and disco's never gonna die. And obviously that doesn't happen. But like when you start this off, you're like, okay, the calamity is going to happen in the space of this miniseries. So your first question is basically, how are our heroes going to fuck up so badly that it creates the calamity? And then when the calamity basically starts, we pretty much learn that if it plays out as it is currently slated to, we will not get the 2/3 of humanity dies calamity ending. We will get extinction of all life in the material plane levels of calamity. So now the heroes have a win condition. They can actually do something that isn't just fuck up the world or, survive as long as they can. There are things that they can do to mitigate the effects of the calamity at the cost of their lives. And suddenly this isn't that kind of, how are these people going to fuck up so bad that everything dies tragedies. It's the kind of tragedy with a hopeful bent where we see people giving their lives to try and save the world. And that's a very different tone. And a lot of why I watched the show is because it became clear that that's what Brennan was going for. Rather than just an absolute heartbreaking tragedy front to back, it was a story of hope in the absolutely most adverse times. It became, like people said, a Rogue One story, basically. So it's really good, and everybody should watch it if they have the stomach for it. And not everybody will. Whew! But yes, I would classify this as, I wouldn't even call this good grimdark. In my head, grimdark is an automatically bad thing. But it's good tragedy, It's a good tragedy. And part of what makes it so heartbreaking is that all the decisions the heroes make that screw over the world are kind of completely reasonable from their perspective. Like, they aren't given enough information to completely understand the ramifications of what they do. And also, because the players are all on board with this, it's not like the DM is tricking them into doing the horrible thing. But it is pretty funny that, the players were sort of taking bets on, which of them would be the one that actually did it. So it's all right, well, this one's cuddling with a betrayer god, and this one's smiting this ancient magical tree she doesn't understand, but is clearly doing something foundational. And this one's been, hoarding knowledge for centuries, so who the fuck knows? It's just very funny. Because they're all on board with it, and they're I want to play a messy bitch who maybe ends the world. It's mwah, so good. Anyway. Sorry, drinking more tea. Oh, if you want to, I haven't seen this yet, but I want to see Brennan make the players cry. Do not worry. Brennan absolutely makes the players cry. And also the players make each other cry. Because a lot of them made the decision that they were going to have, kids and loved ones and families. And then, you watch this and you're oh, God, no. So, it's good. Oh, man. How do you feel about the Stormlight Archives, and how far in are you? Same as I was before. I got partway through Way of Kings, and I read, I want to say, the first Mistborn, but I got halfway through that one. Those books, if I sit down to read them, it's the only thing I can do in a day, and I have other shit going on. That's the only reason. Let's see. More tea. Are you still drinking the awful tea from last time? No, I considered it, but this is some pretty good mint tea. I gotta soothe the throat because I had 6 panels over the course of Worldcon. So I did a lot of hanging out with, the squad in the interim. So I've basically spent the last I don't know, 60 hours this week entertaining people. So my throat's a little scratchy. But fortunately, it's not the plague. I tested. Let's see. Did you watch live action Speed Racer? Of course I did. I'm a good friend. It was fine. It was a bit much for me. It was doing interesting things. It was making interesting decisions. I still can't believe the Wachowskis made it. I've mentioned this. When I first watched that movie, when I started it, and they were so clearly having like an extremely idyllic flashback to Speed Racer's childhood, I thought, wow, what an innovative filmmaking technique, excuse me, to make everything so oversaturated and colorful in this idyllic flashback scene. It looks like a friggin' Lazy Town episode up here. And then it hit the modern day, and I was like, oh no, that's just what the entire movie's gonna look like. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess the way I feel about the Speed Racer movie is that it accomplished what it wanted to. Like, it was extremely purposeful about what it did. Now, normally when I judge a movie as bad, it's because it failed in whatever it was trying to do. But I think there's sort of two levels to that. It's like, did it fail at what it was trying to do? And was what it was trying to do worth it or good? And that second one is a lot trickier because it's a lot more subjective. Like with the first one, there's still an element of subjectivity to it, but you can kind of look at it and be like, all right, what were they trying to do here? Like, what does it look like they were trying to do, and did they nail it? Like, oh, they're playing sad music in this scene, so I'm probably supposed to be sad, but this character is not emoting at all, so I'm not feeling sad. That's like failing to accomplish what they were clearly trying to accomplish. The Speed Racer movie did everything in it on purpose. I just don't think I liked what it did. This is kind of the same thing I had with Centaur World, which I recently rewatched in its entirety. Because it's so baffling to me. Like, it's not... Well, okay. It's not bad. It's competently done. That's the thing. Everything about it is on purpose, and there are parts of it that I really like. The musical numbers all through season 1 are astounding. And just, like, the specific animation distinction between these two worlds, using different styles of animation to portray different, like, kinds of reality, is cool. But as a consequence, whenever characters from the two different worlds interact, it looks like a YouTube poop. It looks like something that shouldn't be happening. And there's the fact that, like, almost all the other characters are absolute joke characters, very intentionally so. And that makes it a little bit difficult to get invested in, like, the found family element, because it's like, okay, the main character is a real character, and, like, one of the other characters is a real character, and everyone here is a walking punchline. So I don't really believe that they like each other, because I don't believe that these people operate on, like, human emotions. So, and then hidden in it is, like, the darkest shit you've ever seen. Centaur World goes to some wild fucking places. They have a cheery musical number debating which specific war crime they should commit to a frozen army of bad guys. One character is on team, let's take advantage of their paralysis to lop all their heads, arms, and legs off. And the other team is in camp, let's just bury them all in a really big hole. I don't fucking know. I've watched the show twice now. I still don't know if I like it. Yeah, we're talking about Centaur World again. I don't know. It baffles me. I think it baffles almost everybody. I haven't found anyone who's like unironically, with no caveats, like, oh man, I love Centaur World. It's my absolute shit. I love it. Like, everyone's got some kind of caveat, and it seems to be like, I think I like it, but I don't know if I get it. And some of the songs in the first season are just incredibly, like, good and poignant. They have a lot of really good singers in there to really just make it work. But then in season 2, there's, like, a lot more talk singing, you know, kind of just, like, singing through, where it's not clear if there's really a rhyme scheme or a melody, but they are clearly singing. I don't know. It's weird. I think maybe everybody should watch it just so, like, I have other eyes on it and we can maybe figure out what the fuck is going on with it. Oh my god, it has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. All right, it's doing something, right? Jesus. Let's see. Whew. Wait, is Scott from Pentatonics in it? I guess that wouldn't surprise me very much. They have a lot of really good singers in it. Let's see. Favorite Discworld book and why is it Hogfather? I mean, either you were drawing on a previous video where I said it's Hogfather, or you fully clocked me, because it absolutely is Hogfather. I really like the Discworld novel Hogfather. I have a very soft spot for it. My mom kind of made a tradition of reading it to us every Christmas season when I was a wee one, which was just very sweet. And if you guys think that I like doing voices or like doing the voiceover thing, it is entirely because my mom would read books to me and do all the voices really well. And she doesn't even like realize that that's an incredibly cool thing she did. But Hogfather is just an incredibly interesting, I mean, it's even kind of a standalone. Like, you don't actually need to read other Discworld novels to really get what's going on with it. Like, it helps to have context, but you kind of don't have to. The premise of Hogfather is that there are these beings called auditors that don't really get reality. They think it's like messy and weird and inefficient. And they have a tendency to try and intrude into reality and fuck with it. They are a fairly common antagonist in stories that feature death as a character. The anthropomorphic personification of death is a recurring figure in all the Discworld novels, but there are some novels that are specifically about him. And as an anthropomorphic personification of death, he has a job that kind of takes him all over the place, but he also sometimes just does other shit. Like, he adopted a daughter at one point. He took on an apprentice. The daughter and the apprentice later got together and had a kid, and then they both died. And the kid, Susan Stow-Hewitt, is not very happy that her grandfather let that happen. And they sort of have this tumultuous relationship because she is the granddaughter of death. And that's kind of like a thing that metaphysically matters, even if there's no, like, blood relation, obviously. He's a 7-foot skeleton in a robe. So the death books get a little bit weird. And the auditors are a fairly common antagonist in stories about death or Susan because they are sort of an existential threat to the stuff about reality that death likes. And the death in the Discworld is just this deeply compassionate figure who at times has, like, temporarily retired. There's a novel called Reaper Man where he gets, like, fired and goes off and gets a job on a farm, basically, and then fights the personification of death they make to replace him because that guy was like a real dick. Anyway, the books are interesting, but that's not Hogfather. The premise of Hogfather is that the auditors commission the Assassin's Guild to assassinate the Hogfather, who is the Discworld equivalent of Santa Claus. And basically, they get one of the assassins to take the gig, an assassin they don't like very much, who, if he fucks up, they can be like, oh no, what a shame, sorry, I guess the consequences can fall squarely on his head, whoopsies. But the guy has an actual plan for it. The premise is that characters in gods in the Discworld and figures that are like gods are sustained by belief. So basically, the assassin is like, okay, we need a way to make everybody stop believing in the Hogfather. Okay. And the plan by which they do that is they mug a tooth fairy, and they steal her collection of teeth, and they use those teeth in a magic ritual to affect the minds of all of the children of the world whose teeth have been collected, to sort of push them into not believing in the Hogfather anymore. And basically, what Death does is Death is like, it is vitally important that the duties of the Hogfather be carried out. So he, like, dresses up in the suit with the beard and the presents, and he zips around the world doing the Hogfather stuff while Susan has to go and, like, fix the tooth fairy situation in the tooth dimension. It's pretty fucking crazy. And in the meantime, there's a lot of other weird shit happening. The Hogfather sort of being unmade means that there's a lot of excess belief lying around, which results in a lot of like minor gods popping into existence. One of them being the god of hangovers, whose life is literally pain. Anyway, it's a really, really good book. And it's one of the first instances that I can remember where I saw a story that introduced the possibility of gods transforming over time. Because in the setting, essentially the Hogfather started off as like this sort of primal tribal being of sacrifice. It's, you know, this is the god that you sacrifice to / the god that you sacrifice to bring back the sun. And the danger of him being killed is that the sun will not rise the next day. Like, yeah, the sun might physically rise, but it won't be the sunrise that heralds the ending of winter. A lot of metaphysical stuff like that. And essentially the idea that this figure, this being that embodies the ending of the cold, dead winter months, slowly evolves over time to be a more like jolly figure, more happy, but there's always still red and white, the colors of blood on snow. And I was like, yo, this is blowing my fucking mind. So, and obviously like real world Santa Claus has very different origins, but there's a lot of similar stuff in there if you dig in the right directions. So I'd say that this definitely had an impact in a lot of the research I do and the sort of more deep dive things into like why this is a concept that I understand and really like. It also has just an absolutely beautiful speech from Death near the end of the book that includes the phrase, like, I think it's like, humans need belief to be human, to be where the falling angel meets the rising ape. The idea that sort of like humans have built themselves up via evolution, but there's also this sort of aspect of like divinity brought down to earth in them. There are a lot of really interesting concepts in this book, and this is like the third thing in this stream that I've said everybody should watch or read, but I stand by this one. Everybody should read Hogfather. And there's also a pretty good like miniseries movie adaptation of it that it's... I don't remember who did it. It's one of those BBC things. It's pretty solid. You know, there's a lot of visual concepts that they can't like quite do because there are some things that are easy to describe as like, it's kind of indescribable, but it's really cool. And then you have to find a way to visually do it. Or like someone's voice sounds a certain way and then you sort of have to make it like a thing that sounds like something a human ear can perceive. So if it's like, oh, they don't speak, but the memory of their words just appear in your head, like, well, that guy's gonna just have a voice in the movie, sorry. And this is where the meme about Death giving little girls swords comes from, because Death briefly spends some time in a shopping mall, basically, and gives out gifts to people who ask for them, including a sword. And he also rescues the little match girl, and so she doesn't die. And you can just, like, feel the rage of Sir Terry Pratchett boiling through of, like, it's fucking stupid that this is supposed to be a heartwarming story when she dies alone and cold in the snow. Absolutely not. So, oh, boy. All right. Drinking tea again. Here we go. But yeah, The Hogfather is a pretty good... I try to get people on the City Watch track as much as I can just because I really love those books. But I think The Hogfather serves as a really good intro to the Discworld universe just to kind of give you the general gist of like what kind of stuff can happen. Because it's a very large, very animated world. Let's see. More tea. Any thoughts on the upcoming Castlevania Nocturne on Netflix? I am so excited for Richter Belmont, but I'm going to be so unhappy if his vocal performance is actually good. Because half the fun of that game is, you know, die, monster, you don't belong in this world, so So I really need that to happen. It's not gonna. They're gonna get someone who's actually pretty good. Although if they continue their current trend and cast like a screen actor with no voice acting experience, it is totally possible that they can beef it that badly, and I will be delighted. Thoughts on the ASDF movies? Oh man, I like them. I've liked them for as long as they've been happening, and I am astounded that they are still happening. So that's cool. All right, Red, you convinced me. Just got the first Discworld novel on Audible. Great, but when you say first Discworld novel, do you mean The Color of Magic? Because you should get Hogfather instead. It's not bad, it's just not a good intro, and everyone feels like they have to get through it, and then they stall out because it's not as good as the others, and they're like, I don't know, and it's like, no, you don't understand, you don't need to read them in order. RRR. I love that movie. It's so hard to talk about because of the name. But yes, RRR on Netflix is really, really good. And it's retroactively ruined a lot of other movie fight choreography for me. We watched it as a movie night, and it's buck fucking wild, and I love it. Let's see. Have you read Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky? I haven't, but Adrian Tchaikovsky is the guy who wrote the short story Elder Race, I think, which I actually did recently read on a friend's recommendation. Oops, sorry. And it's really interesting. It's basically, it's kind of a slightly longer form version of a popular thing that short sci-fi stories would do in the past, where basically the writer would have an interesting concept, and then they would just write a short story where they explore that concept with like a set of interchangeable characters, and then they just kind of move on. So it's like, oh, we're going to do like a little, 3 laws of robotics thing. We're going to put these characters in this weird alien ruin. We're going to put them on a world that's tidally locked and doesn't really have sunrise or sunset, etc., etc. The premise of Elder Race is that centuries to millennia ago, humanity decided to colonize the stars. And one such colony took root on this world and has developed into a sort of pseudo-medieval fantasy-ish world setting that doesn't really understand that it was a human colony from Earth. It's kind of its own thing. It has legends of this first people that spread across the stars, kind of like gods on sky ships, stuff like that. But it doesn't really get that, like, there's an Earth civilization and they are part of it. In part because the civilization on Earth has gone completely dark for the last 300 years. That's probably fine. And the other perspective on this story is the anthropologist from Earth, who's basically been sleeping in, like, an observation tower with a very advanced, like, defense system and a cryosleep thingy for centuries as he's trying to observe this civilization while waiting for his friends to come back from Earth when they left like 300 years ago, and slowly coming to the conclusion that it's probable that something went catastrophically wrong at home and he's fundamentally incredibly alone. He gets tapped by this like local spunky princess for whom this is a classic fantasy adventure, who needs his help to slay a demon. And from his perspective, he's like, I'm violating the Prime Directive in so many ways right now. But also the demon thing that he has to deal with is actually something he doesn't understand. It's like a sort of extra-dimensional Lovecraftian nightmare thing that's nothing like old Earth technology that's malfunctioning or like weird satellites with malfunctioning programming, the stuff that he can actually deal with. So it's a really interesting book just for the sort of anthropological language barrier element of it. And I kind of hope we get more books in that setting, but I don't think we will. But yes, it's called Elder Race, and I really like it. Oh, but a big body horror warning. The spooky, extra-dimensional Lovecraftian demon thing does very nasty stuff to biomass. Let's see. Sorry. Oh, yes. I'm pausing so I can drink tea. Oh boy. Oh boy. Whew. All right. It is very fun to sort of go through like a media lightning round, but I worry that we're reaching the point where people are just listing things I haven't seen. So perhaps we could pivot to a discussion of something else. Perhaps we could talk about more tropes. Just kind of generally fun stuff. Everyone keeps bringing up my comic and I don't know why. It's bait. I'm having fun making the comic and I'm glad that people seem to be liking it. That's kind of as far as I can go on that right now. Oh no, oh no. Oh no, it's happening. Yeah, I'm enjoying writing it. I'm enjoying drawing it. I made a decent amount of line art progress today, which made me happy, because that's always the slowest part for me. What can I talk about with it that isn't hugely spoilery? Not very much. Oh my god, okay. Have you ever considered animating Aurora? Oh my god. All right. I think it's easy for people to not really click with how time-consuming and energy-consuming animation is for such little reward. There's a reason why you have entire studios that do animation, or why people who do their own animation often will drop like a 2-second clip and that's it. Animation is an incredibly inefficient art form from an artistic standpoint only, in that you can put a ton of effort into a single frame and it will be on screen for a 15th to a 30th of a second. And what makes the art work is a fuck ton of those chained together. You know, everyone knows how animation works on a technical standpoint, so that's old news. But I think it's easy to sort of not click with what that means. Like, if you draw an animatic, you might be drawing one frame for 2 to 5 seconds, which is the style that I use in the videos. It's much more manageable. It's still quite time-consuming. Most animations start out that way, with essentially an animatic storyboard. Then people go through and they actually rough out the movement of the characters on screen. You get people whose entire job is just drawing in between frames, between keyframes that are done by a major writer. Not writer, artist. Sorry, someone in chat distracted me. Don't spam, but you can find my comic at Comic Aurora. If you search that, you'll get the website and also my Tumblr for it. Anyway, so here's the thing. I find animation extremely interesting, but I know how my brain works, and I don't have the patience for it. I couldn't make that happen. And if I did, the reward would be so low. Like, the story I want to tell works best in a visual medium, which is why I'm doing it as a comic. Like, I've toyed with the idea of trying to do it as prose. I get bogged down trying to describe the visuals of how specific things look, or like putting focus on what specific background characters are doing with their faces. One of the things I think is a huge benefit of comics as a medium, and frankly also animation, but like, again, as we've discussed, hugely inefficient, is that you can have background details that in a prose story you might not be able to surreptitiously highlight. Like, you might be able to do little bits of, like, there's a conversation happening in the background that the main character isn't really paying attention to, which is like one of the things I thought was really interesting about the writing in Gideon the Ninth, is that there's a lot of very important plot shit happening in that book, but the main character Gideon is so checked out of most of it that she doesn't notice. So there are like background conversations that are sort of half listened to, that if you reread them, you're like, wait, that's really important shit happening there. But she just doesn't click into it. Prose is generally pretty bad at showing anything to the side of what the main character, of what the audience is supposed to be looking at. And visual art is a lot better at that. You can have what's happening in the main focus of the shot, but you can also have a character in the background reacting to something. You can have a character in the background reacting to something that we maybe haven't even seen yet, as sort of like a hint of something to come. You can have little background details. You can frame shots in very interesting ways. And that's something that is a lot more difficult to do in a non-visual medium. But the problem with animation... Oh, people are starting to follow the comic Tumblr. Hello, everybody. The problem with animation is that it's basically a similar visual impact to comics. Of the two art forms, of all art forms, I would say that comics and animation are probably the most similar art forms that are still completely, really distinct from each other. They translate most easily from one to the other. The only real fundamental distinction is that with a comic, the frame boundaries, like the panel borders and shapes, are completely free. You can do whatever you want with them. But with an animation or a movie, the boundaries of the shot are limited by basically the camera aperture and the rectangular dimensions you're using. That's kind of the only fundamental distinction. And for the record, this is all kind of stuff I half remember from Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which is a comic I read like high school that had a much more formative impact on how I think about this stuff than I realized. I reread it recently and I was like, oh my God, this is where I got all of my ideas from. So I'd check that out for further reading if you don't want to just hear me vaguely ramble about this stuff. But the reason why I've never really realistically considered personally doing an animation project is because I don't have the patience for it, and it takes so long to get an animation into a state that looks good. Like, the videos that I make are animatics, and in my head they are very similar to comics. It's kind of the same, like, panel to panel setup punchline, you know, pacing flowing across different panels, spaced differently. That makes sense to me, and I like that. And efficiency-wise, it's not too bad. I can fill out like 30 seconds to a minute of a video in like a rather light day's work, and if I push it, I can get even farther than that. Real animation can be almost infinitely complex. And there are people I follow who like, oh my God, so many people are following that. What the hell is happening? Have I really not promoted this recently enough? Okay, geez. But, oh, please don't crash the site again. Basically, there are people I follow who do animation, and those people kind of frighten me with their ability, because that is an incredibly, like, niche skill. Like, being able to draw keyframes and specific poses is one thing. But being able to draw every stage in a character's motion is the kind of artistic challenge that people don't realize they aren't up to until they try. One of the things I think is a huge benefit of drawing comics and stuff like that is that it will kind of force you to draw things you never thought of. And this is a really good way to get rapidly better at stuff that you didn't think of. So, like, basically, sorry, gotta drink more tea. My brain is covering too many things. Oh my God. Jeez. In my head, like, a lot of the things that I make work best as comics. And transitioning from that mindset to making animatic videos was not a very complicated jump. Like, I do use panel borders in slightly creative ways sometimes, but I don't tend to do a lot of the weird stuff that some people do. I don't really mess with gutter size. I don't tend to bleed stuff through. So it's really not that different from the way I do, like, multiple frames in a video. True proper animation requires a very deep understanding of how everything moves and how willing you are to stylize that. So, like, you can draw a cool pose, and then you can draw, like, the character's moving, and then you're like, oh, the character's in another cool pose. That's, like, comic stuff. That's, for me, it's not too hard. For a while it was. I wasn't good at drawing poses because human anatomy didn't make sense to me. This is very common for artists. But I got to the point where I was like, okay, But there's sort of a level of leeway there. Like, if I draw a character in one panel and then I draw them with slightly different proportions in a different panel, that's not really going to break anyone's immersion unless they're really looking for it. You know, there's sort of flexibility there. But in the space of a single shot, characters kind of need to stay within certain boundaries of how they should look. If you've watched classic anime, you might have seen some where different episodes were clearly animated by, like, different studios, because the characters will look slightly different. I know for sure this is true with Inuyasha. There are some episodes where I'd be like, everyone looks really pretty this week. And there are some where I'm like, everyone looks really weird this week. And it's just like slightly different keyframe animation, slightly different takes on like what a face shape and eye shape should look like. And in the space of a single shot, that's not a problem. But if a character's sort of oscillating between that within the space of a single movement, then that's a little bit off-putting. You get people complaining about, like, off-model figures. And, like, the thing is, most animators now are really good at this. Like, if you pause a more cartoony show in the middle of, like, a movement and you get a smear frame, you might be like, oh, that's wacky. Why do they have, like, 5 eyes and their bodies all stretch? And it's like, that's because you're not supposed to see this frame in isolation. That's because that's to make the movement look good. Part of the stylization inherent in animation is that you take liberties that are not realistic to make the motion look good, because that is what animation is really good at, is motion. And essentially, when you communicate that by having a character move, like, it might be tempting to sort of rotoscope it, you know? For those of you who don't know, rotoscoping is when you basically take live action footage and you essentially draw over it. You trace the fundamental poses. A lot of old animation is rotoscoped in key places. A lot of classic Disney movies have not necessarily rotoscoped, but like drawn heavily from guidance footage that they record beforehand. So like a lot of the classic princess dance scenes were filmed originally and then they sort of animated from that footage. Like the old like, is it Ralph Bakshi? The old, like, 2D animated Lord of the Rings movies were almost entirely rotoscoped, and they look whack in places, because the best way to communicate movement is not necessarily to capture movement from life and recreate it meticulously. You know, Looney Tunes cartoons portray all kinds of unrealistic movements, and they look and feel great, because they're about the movement, not about the anatomy of the figure involved. And a degree of that stylization also includes in things like comics, where it's like you want to draw somebody running. You don't necessarily like take a video of somebody running and then pause them and then like rotoscope or trace over that specific pose. You might get someone who looks like they're like falling over or like off balance or up on one leg doing a weird yoga thing, but none of those will communicate that they are running. You know, like the way you stylize something often has very little to do with what it actually looks like in real life and more to do with how it feels. And doing that in animation is a skill set I have not cultivated and don't understand. So, people I know who do animation confuse and frighten me, and I bow to their power, but I have never seriously considered making any kind of long-form animation. I can't even, like, bring myself to try and animate a human figure. I get so frustrated with the intervening frames, because, like, I like drawing poses that stand on their own. Essentially what you would do for keyframes. But I don't necessarily know how to draw all the intervening frames that get the character from cool stance 1 to cool stance 2, and that frustrates me. Okay, more tea. Comment. Rotoscoping is kind of wild when you think about it. You'd think that tracing something exactly would make it more accurate, but it's exactly the opposite. Yeah, this is one of the interesting things about pretty much all forms of visual art, is that, like, scientific illustration and drawing from life can be very good at certain things, but a lot of art is kind of... There's, like, 2 branches on the skill tree. One of them is being able to see exactly what is in front of you, not what you expect to see, and then put that on paper. And the other one is being able to see exactly what's in front of you and then capture the important bits and put that on paper. And those are 2 connected skills, but they aren't the same. So scientific illustration is about, like, recreating the thing you're drawing down to the minutest detail because essentially you're doing what cameras would have done if they had existed at the time and were good. My mom specialized in scientific illustration, so this is a lot of what I grew up kind of around. And a large part of that is sort of learning to switch on your artist eyes and look at what's in front of you and figure out how to put that on the page. And if you're doing scientific illustration, that's like, all right, what is literally in front of me to the minutest detail, and how do I get that on paper using the tools I have? But with a lot of things like figure drawing, it's not so much about drawing the actual shape the person is or the exact form they're in. It's about capturing weight and movement. And oftentimes, if you try and trace over a pose of somebody in an interesting stance, you won't actually capture that weight and movement like you think you should. Like, your brain is picking up on something from seeing them in motion. But if you pick a single frame out of that and put that on the page, it's not going to communicate that motion. It can't. It's just one frame. So, I don't know. It's really interesting stuff. There's a reason why I think that starting with life drawing is a really good idea and then stylizing from there, because that sort of lets you make the decision on what you want things to look like. But like, you know, it feels like it should be easy to be able to like use your eyes to see exactly what is in front of you. But like if you sit a kid down and are like, draw a tree, you're probably going to get one of those little lollipop trees with a stick trunk and a round ball of leaves, which is not what almost any trees look like, but it is what cartoon trees look like. And it's what people say drawings of trees, if you're a kid, should look like. Or, you know, you have a kid draw the sun and they draw an orb with lines sticking out of it and maybe like a smiling face and sunglasses. And it's like, don't look directly at the sun, kids, but like, that's not what the sun looks like. Or, you know, you draw a star with 5 points and stuff like that. The way that we are sort of taught to perceive the world is not the way the world looks. Or like a slightly spicier angle. If you draw like human figures from life, you will probably be surprised at how like kind of thick and lumpy they are, because the way that we are taught to draw people, and I will freely admit that I'm guilty of this. I love drawing beautiful human specimens. It's a lot of fun for me. But if you draw figures from life, they are not going to be as thin or as smooth as you maybe expect them to be, just because almost nobody looks like what the image of what a person looks like. I think that was enough looks likes in that sentence. And just kind of being able to see that can be tough. It's a really weird and difficult skill to cultivate, and you'd think it would be the easiest thing in the world, but I think just because we pattern recognize so naturally, when we look at something and we think we know what it is, we extrapolate. It's kind of like why, like if you're sleepy, you'll start like, I just jumped straight to like the spooky zone. But the thing is, like, our brain is really good at identifying things that look like people and things that look like faces. I think it's called pareidolia. And it's also like, well, we're good at identifying other things, but we are really good at identifying faces and things that look like people. So like, you know, you look at like car headlights and you're like, that car is happy. The fuck does that mean? But like, it makes perfect sense to us, for the most part. And if you're sleepy and you start getting like minor like visual hallucinations at the edge of vision, oftentimes your brain is like, oh, that's like a human figure in my peripheral vision, which is why when you're sleep deprived, you might see shadow people, which was a long explanation to not make that sound deranged and creepy, but it's like a thing that does happen. Or like, you know, we sort of extrapolate things from small bits of, not evidence, but like small observations we draw out from them to try and figure out what we're looking at, which is why you might have a moment where like you wake up and you're convinced there's like a human figure in the room, and then you sort of wake up more and you're like, oh, that's my bathrobe hung on the back of my door like it always is, you know? Your brain extrapolates from small data points and constructs a human figure, and then when you actually look at it, there's nothing there. Or like, I don't know if you guys have ever experienced like you're looking at something and there's a moment of just like frozen incomprehension as it does something you weren't expecting it to do. And then you're like, oh, it's like a plastic bag blowing in the breeze and not like a cat that just started to levitate. Or like, oh, that's actually an alpaca and not a sheep whose neck is moving in an impossible way, that kind of thing. It's all kind of a side effect of how our periodeliac brains pattern recognize from fairly thin slices of information and then sort of go from there. And a lot of what I think is necessary to be able to sort of artistically capture human figures, background environments, lighting and shadow effects is to sort of be able to actually like switch off the overlay of social identification that your brain helpfully broadcasts onto things and be like, what am I actually looking at for a second? That second example was very specific. I saw a video of it, and I had this moment of like, what the fuck? And I was like, oh, it's an alpaca. How cute. It's just, when you think you're looking at a sheep, you're not expecting the neck to get long. Anyway. This tea's getting a little iffy. I think for some reason mint tea needs to be hot. Red, can you think of a favorite among your many character designs? Maybe one of the Greek gods or someone else? It's kind of basic, and also probably not very surprising. I adore the Monkey King. Sun Wukong's design is so fun and so energetic, and his expressions are so good. Like, he's very fun for me because he never really poses halfway. He's always sort of like stretching out or like, his face is always doing something interesting. And the funny thing is, I think a lot of the reason why people initially thought that Falst's design was kind of very heavily based on him is because I gave them a similar like body language thing where they both are almost constantly in motion or tense. They'll be crouching down or like hands, arms kind of locked behind their head or like a knee sort of tucked up, because in my head it makes sense that these characters would be sort of under a certain amount of constant tension, like a coiled spring. And also they're both fluffy and have tails. So I understand the contrast, but they're not supposed to be particularly similar. Let's see. Can we talk about ReBoot? How it was a pioneer in computer animation? I don't know if it actually was. Well, I have great news for you, commenter. It absolutely was. I saw a few people dangling this in front of me earlier, but I didn't want to just immediately derail. ReBoot, produced by Mainframe Entertainment, was the first fully 3D animated TV show, like ever. It came out in like the mid-90s when computer animation technology was extremely new. And the studio, Mainframe Entertainment, made a few other shows, including Transformers Beast Wars, which was rather better known than ReBoot just by virtue of being a Transformers thing. Although I've seen bits of it and it looks like hot ass compared to ReBoot because it has to do so much stuff that it's not really prepared for. Like trying to render realistic animals on a 1995 computer should be disallowed by The Hague. Anyway, the thing with ReBoot is that they knew exactly what they were doing, and they knew exactly what they could do and what they couldn't do. So, all the characters are sculpted pretty well. They kind of look like action figures. None of them have realistic skin, but none of them are intended to have realistic skin. They have, like, blue and green skin. That looks kind of like the kind of, matte plastic you would get on an action figure. They were not good at rendering liquids, so they didn't. They were not good at rendering long hair or fluid or fabric dynamics, so they didn't. So everyone is wearing, like, pants and, like, mostly fairly skin-tight fabric, and everyone either has short hairstyles or like pretty solid hairstyles. So the main character has dreadlocks that are fairly sculpted to his head, and all the female characters have short hairstyles or hairstyles that are like tied up into a bun that we never see out of it in the first couple seasons. They were not good with, let's see. There was no subsurface scattering at this point. You didn't get any of that. There were no like complex snow renders or fluid renders or physics engines. So that just didn't happen. But they were really good at metal, and they were really good at ray-traced reflective surfaces. and to the point where they basically put ray traced surfaces on everything they could find. So the aforementioned character with dreadlocks has his hair is like metallic silver. It reflects his environment. He's in almost every shot in the first 2 seasons. If that were not easy for the computers to render, they wouldn't have done it. And one of the common mechanics they pop up in that season is the presence of portals, which can be stabilized from tears. Don't worry about it. And portals are just big bubbles that perfectly reflect an environment around them that are the environment of wherever they are connected to, not the space they're currently in. So they had ray traced reflections down pat. And they also had a pretty good, like, sort of electric-y, caustic, underwatery effect that they could apply as a texture to shapes. So instead of rendering water, they just used that. So there wasn't like an ocean around mainframe. There was an energy sea that was just this texture. And whenever they had like tears or energy sources, it would just be that texture mapped onto like a sphere with some lights coming out of it. And almost every character in ReBoot is not a person-shaped person. Most of them are binomes that look like zeros or ones. And this meant that they were much easier to render than the main guys, so that they could basically just focus on like the 3 main characters that are shaped like people, and then all the background characters could just be like little like 1-shaped guys and 0-shaped guys, and like the main bad guys. And this was a really good way to sort of play to their strengths, because the other thing that they did is that this was set inside a computer, which meant it made sense that everything kind of looked like that they didn't have to try and render anything realistic in the real world, because they were never going to be in the real world. They were living inside a computer. Time was moving way faster for them than it did on the outside. And the only place that we got things that looked like they were trying to be real-world environments was inside games. In the first 2 seasons, the main, like, the core loop of the story is that the user would input a game which manifested as a huge purple, like, cubic prism descending from the heavens, like a hole opens, and an electronic buzz plays, and a woman's voice says, "Warning, incoming game," and it just descends and lands on a sector of the computer. And this part doesn't make any sense if you think about it, but basically if the user wins the game, anyone from mainframe who's in the game at the time is nullified. They get turned into like a little slug, and it damages the sector. The implication being that if the user wins too many games, he's going to brick his own computer, but losing games is fine. I don't know. It's fine. It's part of the pretense of the show. I don't mind it. And inside the game, the environment was completely different. It would be like a high fantasy adventure, or like a racing game, or like a Star Wars style spaceflight game. So you'd get attempts to render like grass environments or textures like that. But it was okay that they looked kind of like ass, because they were set inside a 3D rendered computer game in the 90s. So that's what it would have looked like. I really can't stress enough how smart they were in the art design for this show about like exclusively playing to their strengths and never trying too hard to do anything that they just couldn't handle, because that meant that they could focus on the story. And it's good. And when I say that, what I mean is that it's very much for kids in the first season, kind of stops being for kids in the second season. Like, it still got kid stuff, but like a lot of the stuff in ReBoot was referential humor that I didn't understand when I was a little kid, because I hadn't seen anything they were referencing. And it goes from referencing things like Star Wars and Star Trek to like the X-Files and like The Prisoner. And in the 4th season, which I don't like and pretend didn't happen, it escalates to like referencing Austin Powers. So it was very much intentional that it was sort of aging with the audience. Yeah, I don't know. It did a lot of fun stuff. But as I've talked about in a lot of trope talks, the first season is very much for kids. The second season kind of escalates, and then it ends with a complete rug pull, because the protagonist of the first 2 seasons, who's been kind of like locked in this like Bugs Bunny-esque style trickster hero conflict with the main villain, Megabyte, who's a computer virus. Don't worry about why he's named that. It doesn't actually make sense. It's fine. Basically, Megabyte wins and launches him into the web, which is established as a terrifying, corruptive chaos dimension from which things called web creatures emerge to wreak havoc and do, like, alien-style nightmare fuel to shit that happens. So Bob's just, like, fucking stuck out there and, like, presumed... I mean, they can't say presumed dead. It's a kid's show. But, like, I fully thought he was, like, straight up dead. And then season 3... they got, like, a better lighting renderer, which was cool, and they stopped being under the thumb of the BSNP so they could, like, make slightly more adult references, and the female characters were allowed to have, like, separated boobs. This is a complicated thing. The BSNP was, like, the Bureau of Standards and, like, something. Basically, it might have been Bureau of Standards and Practices, actually, and their deal was you can't possibly have anything that might corrupt the kittywinks. And that included, like, an actual stipulation that any female character with boobs had to sort of have, like a mono boob. Like, if you have a tank top that's stretched a little tight and you just get, like no... whatever. But they didn't have to do that in season 3 anymore. I don't know why I thought that was worth bringing up. Anywho, but they showed off, like, a much better lighting renderer, and, like, they got a little better at, like, interesting, like, corroded metallic textures were a thing they could do in season 3. They did a lot of more interesting settings, a lot more humanoid characters, because they could clearly, like, actually render them. Good, the Bad, and the Ugly reference in an episode, some Conan the Barbarian stuff. Like, they were just having a great time. But the tone of season 3 was already pretty wildly distinct from seasons 1 and 2. And then, as mentioned, it pulls a time skip in season 3, but it's a localized time skip. Basically, wow, I brought up the monoboob and, like, 200 people joined the stream. Oh, boy. Anyway, so basically, as I mentioned, the way that the games work is that they drop on a sector, and anyone who's under the GameCube when it comes down gets stuck in the game, has to reboot, hence the title of the show, into essentially a version of them that's optimized for the game. So they reboot into a character in the game, pretty much. And then they try and stop the user from winning. And if they win, the GameCube leaves, and they reset back to, you know, who they are. In an episode in season 2, a game had come down that was like an undersea adventure thing, and like Bob and Dot had rebooted into mermaids, like spooky shark mermaids too. The character designs for the rebooted characters is really cool. And Enzo had rebooted into... Enzo was like the kid... Like, he's like the tag-along kid for season 1 and 2. He's like Dot's younger brother. He's kind of the Wesley Crusher in that, like, he's the kid appeal character who, like, you expect the young viewers to sort of relate to. And he really looks up to the hero and all that jazz. But he was feeling kind of lonely in season 2 because I guess they got enough of a budget to point out that they're like the only humanoid sprites in the entire thing. And they have like a tragic backstory explanation for that, which is that Bob, like Dot and Enzo's dad had done some experiment that had gone so wrong that it like blew up their twin city and destroyed almost everybody else who wasn't a binome, which is like, back the fuck up. What? Anyway. So Enzo was feeling lonely because he has no kids his age to play with, and when he goes into the game, he meets this girl, Andrea, who's like a young, like, warrior, kind of mermaidy, his age. And the plot twist is basically that she's a game sprite. She's in the game. She's like an AI that's meant to stop the user, but when the game leaves, she'll go with it. And she basically knocks Enzo out, like, puts a copy of herself into his little icon, and when he gets out of the game and like taps it, basically a copy of her pops out. She's like, I copied myself into your thing so I could come out. Like, I probably still can't go into any games or I will get stuck because the game thinks I belong there. But I really didn't want to lose my friend and didn't want you to lose your friend. And he's like, yay! And they just hang out and it's really sweet. And then the ending of season 2 happens and Bob gets fucking launched into space. And the premise is suddenly a lot darker because now Enzo is kind of the protector of the system and with no help except for, like, well, basically Dot is like, you are a child, you absolutely cannot do this. And he's like, I gotta. Bob gave me guardian code. I absolutely must protect the system at all costs, even though I am a child. And this turns into a very interesting character arc where basically, I've talked about this in various trope talks, I won't retread it too far, but he grows up very quickly when he gets stuck in the games and becomes a Matrix, this like really edgy, very grumpy, extremely badass warrior who is everything he wasn't as a child, but very much shaped by trauma and like not about that. And like when he sort of reunites with Bob, because spoiler alert, Bob's not fucking dead, they find him, he just kind of looks cooler and is voiced by one of the guys who voiced Goku in an earlier dub of the show. He kind of realizes what he turned himself into and has this kind of like self-loathing crisis about it, which I wasn't expecting to still hold up, but it really does. I jumped ahead a whole bunch. Basically, the thing is, when they were sort of messing around with like, okay, we have Andrea and she's out in the system, but like, we think if she gets stuck in a game, she'll just fully get stuck. So what do we do? And they kind of found a way to like hack it so that her code could switch between being a game sprite and being like a mainframer. So if they swapped that, the game would presumably think that, oh, she doesn't belong in the game, spit her out when it leaves. But it was untested, and the way they made this work is they sort of linked it with Enzo's icon, so he could do the same thing. And what this means is that when they are in a game and they lose in a scene that fucking, like, Enzo loses an eye, it's crazy. I can't stress enough. I watched this when I was like 8, tops. Basically what he does is he like looks over at her pointedly and he like taps his icon so it shifts to game sprite mode. The implication being like, if we don't do this, the game's gonna straight up kill us. So we're gonna do this and we'll leave with the game and then we'll try and get back. And she does the same thing and they leave with the game and everyone assumes they're dead. And then they spend what turns out to be a very long time trying to get home. And when they get back, only a year has passed at home, but everything's gone to shit in the meantime. And they're all adults now, deeply scarred from their experiences and not really sure how to reconnect with the people who knew them as children. And I think that the build-up to that arc is so worth watching. Like, Season 1 has a lot of dumb stuff, but I love it very much. And Season 2 is where it starts getting just uncritically, genuinely quite good, even if it does have some silly gags. And Season 3 is when it gets really, really good. It's when all the planting pays off, and I really like it. And it does kind of bum me out that it's hard for people to get through because of the visuals. Like, I understand it, you know, there are things I can't watch because the visual just doesn't really work for me. And ReBoot was animated in the 90s. They were doing their absolute best, but parts of it are really chunky and weird. Like, the walk cycles are all pretty stiff for a while. The face animation, they kind of put all the work into so that, like, you can tell when someone's mad or happy or scared or silly. Like, they pointedly put a lot of work into it. There's a bit in the very first episode where, like, a really bright light shines on Bob's face, and they go out of their way to show his pupils, like, contracting. And they didn't have to do that. But they were showing off. They were showing what they could do. And there's just a lot of... It's one of the only shows I've ever seen that pulled off that kind of escalation in tone really well. The bad guys are also great. They're all voiced by some extremely cool people. Megabyte is voiced by Tony J, Judge Claude Frollo, and he fucking kills it. So that's cool. Anyway, I mean, there's a lot of stuff I can probably still say about this show, but it's so good. And I don't know. I really do wish people would give it more of a chance because just from a writing standpoint, it pulls off some stuff that I have not seen anything else pull off to the same degree. Yeah, I really got to drink some tea. Oh my God, how long have I been talking about ReBoot? I totally lost track. Jesus. Frisket the dog is the best character, but also he's the character where it takes the longest for his animation to stop being kind of bad because his legs don't really bend. I have like a Frisket action figure and his legs don't bend there either. They just kind of like, it's like a shoulder joint. Oh, Jesus. Oh, Season 4, why is it bad? It's only the back half of Season 4, really. The front half of Season 4 has a fairly interesting concept that I thought was cool, that they actually plant in Season 3. There's basically an episode where they go to like an Old West style system with ports to the net that they can use to potentially just get back home. But they find out that the system is under the control of the Guardians. Now, for context, Bob, like the hero they've been looking for, is a Guardian from a place called the Supercomputer. And so it's like, what the fuck do you mean? The Guardians like protect systems. And they're like, well, not anymore. Now they're bad. And basically the thing is, there is a virus that has taken root in the supercomputer and has been infecting all the Guardians. And basically Bob and now Matrix are like the only Guardians that have not been infected by this being. And that's all we get in Season 3. It's just planting. And then in the first half of Season 4, they bring this up. The demon, or the spoiler alert, the virus is called Damon, and she is a Trojan virus. She puts her code everywhere, and then she activates at a set time. And she has this kind of like, almost like religious looking vibe in that like everyone sort of hears her word, and she's got like this sort of spiky halo thingy, and it's not bad, but the problem is throughout this half of the season, they are setting up what they're going to be doing in the second half of the season. And unfortunately, that part is an idiot plot, which only happens if all the characters are acting weirdly like cruel and out of character. Because essentially, the entire point of Season 3 was we are going to find Bob and bring him home, and then they do. And in the process, he ends up he gets an upgrade that gives him some pretty crazy powers, but at the beginning of Season 4, they kind of established that because he did this upgrade with a thing that was kind of broken, it's not great for him to use those powers. It's like he's like sick from it, but he's kind of not telling anybody, which does make sense for him in character. But the fact that nobody else notices doesn't really make as much sense. And throughout the course of the first half of Season 4, when Damon does get control over everybody, then it kind of gets a lot worse for him. They also did a thing at the very end of Season 3 where, so as mentioned, Enzo went through this crazy character arc and became Matrix and came back all scarred and upset. But because when at the very end of Season 3, they basically saved the system by a literal act of divine intervention. They let the system fully crash with the assumption that the user, who has never been seen, because the user does not exist within the computer, they exist outside the computer, they're literally invoking a divine intervention from a being that they basically have faith in existing. If the system completely crashes, maybe he'll restore it. The system crashes, and the user does restore it, and like new stuff, like new sectors fall from the heavens. But because Matrix's like icon was not in mainframe mode, it was in like game sprite mode, the system is like, oh, this person doesn't exist in mainframe anymore. We'll restore them from a backup. So a kid version of Enzo pops into existence with none of the character development that Matrix got and no memory of what the fuck just happened. And now basically there's an Enzo running around and a Matrix running around. And now Matrix is dealing with the fact that all of his externalized anxieties about who he used to be are a person who he doesn't like very much. Which is an interesting concept that I didn't like very much because I really liked Matrix and I didn't really like the juxtaposition between him and Kid Enzo very much. And it kind of felt like the show felt like it needed a Kid Enzo back. But that's okay. But this kind of does mean that Kid Enzo is like the only person in the first half of Season 4 who doesn't get Damoned so that he can be the one who like ultimately sort of saves the day. And there's some good moments in it. But it's just, it's a little bit, that part kind of just lost me. And then when they deal with Damon in a slightly complicated way that involves one of the best characters doing some crazy shit, they're like gonna end it with like a, oh no, Bob's hurt, but that's okay. He's in the arms of his love and they'll figure out a way to stop this. A portal opens and Bob walks out, like Season 2 Bob, like OG Bob. And everyone is like, oh shit, I guess that must be the real Bob. And this is an idiot plot. This is a textbook idiot plot. It doesn't make sense to jump to that conclusion. And even if that were the conclusion to jump to, it doesn't undo the fact that the Bob that they got back from the web is the one who's been saving the day over and over again and helping them out and is their friend. So, like, kind of kicking him to the curb just because new Bob doesn't have his sexy redesign is, like, weird, and I don't like it very much. And it escalates to the point where, like, Dot and this new Bob are getting married. Like, fully getting married, and they do the I object thing, obviously. And the spoiler alert is that obviously new Bob is not Bob. It's actually Megabyte, who, like, evolved when he got flung into the web at the end of season 3. He, like, turned into an even scarier virus, and now he can pretend to be other people. And it ends with a full-on cliffhanger, like dangling for a season 5. So season 3 ends with an actually happy, satisfying resolution, and season 4 pulls the rug out from under almost all of that, and then ends with, like, haha, Megabyte's in control of the system, prepare yourselves for the hunt. And then they just didn't get more. And that just makes me sad. So, in my head, I just cut it off at the end of season 3 because it's a fully happy ending with potentially room for more stories, but nothing that I needed to actually see. And season 4 did enough that I didn't like that I just kind of mentally don't count it. I think that people can watch it, but, like, I want people who watch the show to like it. So I don't recommend the parts of it that I don't think are worth watching. Oh yeah, sorry, Megabyte was the Trojan virus. Damon was something else. But I think Trojan viruses do sometimes, like, that's the name for it when they have a time activation. Like some circumstances under which they specifically trigger. And yes, they also did a live-action reboot thing where they basically just turned it into Tron, and it's so fucking weird, because if they could make these characters look good in 1995, I feel like it shouldn't be hard to make them look good in 2022. But somehow, all the original mainframe characters from the footage I've seen in the remakes look like these weird, like, shiny plastic ghouls. I don't know, man. It makes me sad. I gotta drink so much more tea. Oh, boy, okay. There was a webcomic that sort of followed up from season 4. I read through it all once. I don't remember where I found it. I think I had mixed feelings about it, but that was mostly because, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the stream, it was continuing from a point in the show that I hadn't enjoyed, and it couldn't just ignore the canon. So, like, it sort of had to play out from where they'd gotten to, which I thought was just stupid. But I would be interested in finding it. Yeah, Hexadecimal was Megabyte's sister. They were from the same viral strain, and they had the ability to fuse into a virus called Gigabyte, who is only in one episode, but is pretty scary. Oh, season 4 also did, like, a retcon that I didn't like, because for the first couple seasons, like, Bob is a bit of a trickster hero, which is kind of why I like him so much, because he's like a full good-hearted paragon, but he often wins through cunning because Megabyte is really strong, like, just really strong, and has, like, an army of minions. So Bob kind of has to be a little sneaky to win. And they have a bit of, like a comedic rapport with each other, and it does feel a little bit like Tom and Jerry at times. And then in season 4, they were like, by the way, Bob had, like, a guardian mentor who got fully ganked by, like, a virus who came out of a portal and then ran away into a different portal to mainframe, and he followed that virus, and that's why he was in mainframe. And it's like, what? He was out for revenge for his dead mentor, and he was fucking cracking jokes with, like, the evolved version of the virus that did it? What the fuck? So, there's just a lot of stuff in season 4 that I just don't like, for a lot of reasons. But it's okay, because you don't have to watch it. The guitar battle was a highlight of the show, but also a good sign of, like, the tonal dissonance, the fully intentional tonal dissonance that I liked. Because it's like, end of season 1, or like one episode, it's Enzo's birthday and Bob's gonna do a guitar performance or something, or like they're just running around. What are they gonna do? And then, oh no, Megabyte crashes the party and pulls out a really fucking sick electric guitar and absolutely shreds on it. And then Bob shows up with his own sick guitar, and then they have a guitar duel. And then in the very next episode, Megabyte is like, haha, I will steal every single icon data thing from this one sector and turn all of these people into my viral slaves, and it'll all be Dot's fault. And she spends the entire episode crippled with grief about failing, and has a very vivid hallucination of the bad future that her actions will cause if she doesn't snap out of it. And I love that. I genuinely love it when shows will switch between silly to serious, but know when to be serious about it. It shaved the beard. That is such a good way to describe it. For context, the idea that a show grows the beard or grew the beard came from Star Trek TNG, The Next Generation, where, like, season 1 and 2, Riker does not have a beard, and then in season 3, he suddenly has a beard. And also, coincidentally, from that season onward, the show is a lot better. So the joke is kind of like a show grows the beard when it gets good. So correspondingly, we can infer that a show shaves the beard when it was good and then gets bad. Sorry, I'm drinking more tea. I have no idea how long I've been talking about ReBoot. This is why I haven't done this before on previous streams. Hmm. 45 minutes? Are you kidding me? Good God, you guys gotta stop me when this is happening. This is why I haven't done one of these. Whenever people are like, tee-hee, do a ReBoot stream, I'm like, most of you don't want that, because I won't be able to stop. The power I will unleash is not anything that this world was meant to handle. Oh, God. Oh, yeah. Also, Mouse, the character from ReBoot, is really good. One of the first characters I ever saw where I was like, huh, I wish I was more buff. Because Mouse is like, she's like a, well, she's a hacker, but I guess more realistically, she's a hacker program because she's not a user. She exists in the computer and kind of hops systems. And she's like a Southern belle with a katana and a full tank top. And she's pretty buff. And I was like, I want a tank top and to be buff. And it was definitely Mouse's fault. It's been reinforced by other characters since then, but that was a big formative moment for me. Oh boy, let's see. Ooh, a question that isn't about more ReBoot. Yeah, let's give that a shot. You said that Tolkien required dragons to be both plot relevant and thematically fitting. Does that mean Tolkien viewed dragons the way you do kaiju? I think that's fully accurate. I think that my take that kaiju typically mean something and are often at their best when they do mean something does basically just mean that they are just dragons, but again, I hadn't made that connection, but I like that angle, actually. Whoops, sorry. Weird question, but do you have a favorite Batman villain? Says a lot more than a zodiac sign, IMO. I love Mr. Freeze. He makes me so sad. I guess specifically the version they establish in the Batman animated series and then later Batman Beyond, because I know he was more goofy before that, but just Heart of Ice is such a good episode, and it completely reframed the way they do him from that point forward. And it's so funny watching Batman and Robin when they sort of try and like resolve these two portrayals of his character into one character, because you get like, you know, you get the Arnold, all right, everybody chill, and then and then he'll also be like, oh, my Nora, it's so sad that you are like dying and like frozen in this tube, and it's just like, I'm sorry, like, he doesn't want to be evil, he's just doing it for his wife, but also he really loves his job. And there's an absolutely crushing episode of Batman Beyond about Mr. Freeze, and I love it. It makes me extremely sad. It's kind of in the same category as, like, if Batman Beyond were the only future I could see for Batman, I would be sad because it would retroactively wreck a lot of stuff in the animated series and Justice League, because it's canonical that Bruce Wayne grows up like old and alone and kind of alienates everybody, and that's sad. But in my head, I think I've mentioned this, the way I mentally reconcile this, because I really like Terry McGinnis. I like him too much to lose him. So I don't just write this off as like a bad future. In my head, Batman Beyond is the timeline where Damian Wayne is never born. So it's off in its own little timeline. You can have all the crossovers you want, but it's not the mainline timeline. And there's an actual explanation to sort of shore this up, even though in the Batman Beyond tie-in comics, Damian Wayne was later introduced. But the thing is, there's an episode of Justice League that is essentially just a distant finale for Batman Beyond. It's set like years after the finale of the first one. And Terry finds out something upsetting, which is that he is Bruce Wayne's biological son. And he concludes that Bruce must have known or orchestrated this somehow, and has been manipulating him from the start. But basically, he goes off to Amanda Waller, who is the leader of Cadmus in the current Justice League time, and at this point he's quite old and retired. And she basically fills him in on what happened, which is that Bruce Wayne had no fucking clue about any of this, but it is possible that he figured it out at some point because he is Batman. But basically, this Batman did not have any heirs, and Amanda Waller was of the opinion that the world would always need a Batman. So basically, they got this random dude in a happy marriage, and they used like a retrovirus to overwrite his reproductive DNA with Bruce Wayne so that any children he had would be Bruce Wayne's biologically. And if you like watch the show, you might notice that like when we see Terry's dad in the first episode, he's kind of got like mousy brown hair, and his mom is a redhead. Terry and his brother both have black hair and blue eyes. Black hair is a dominant trait. If both of their parents look like that, neither of those kids should look like that. So it's kind of an interesting bit of planting that got paid off way down the line. But basically the idea was that they would orchestrate an event similar to Bruce Wayne's tragic backstory. They would have those two killed when this kid was at an early age. And they got the Phantasm from Mask of the Phantasm, now quite old. They contracted her to do it. But Phantasm's whole thing was that, like, she and Bruce Wayne were, like, fully in love with each other, but, like, too motivated by their respective tragic backstories to give it up to be with each other. So when she was faced with the possibility of creating another one, of, like, scarring this poor kid in the exact same way the man she loved was so damaged forever, she couldn't do it. She refused. She walked away. So Terry did not lose his parents at age 8. He lost his dad at age 16. Totally different. So, it's kind of like we tried to make you the next Batman, but then it kind of fell off the rails. But then you did it anyway. So, like, you do actually have agency and control over your life. Congratulations. And it's like, hooray. But this just doesn't make sense in a universe where Damian Wayne is born, where Bruce Wayne has biological descendants running around that Amanda Waller could try and, like, clone or replicate or whatever. Admittedly, Damian is a major problem child, so she might have thought it wasn't worth it. But anyway, this is how I mentally reconcile them. All right, more tea. Uh-oh, I'm running out of tea. Well, this stream has been running for 3 hours anyway. Maybe we take it to 3 hours, 30 minutes, and then we call it a night. Does that sound good? I think that sounds good. Oh, that was a tangent. What was the point? Fuck. The tangent was that I liked Batman Beyond. And yes, there was an episode of Batman Beyond about Mr. Freeze. Thank you. Because somebody asked what my favorite Batman villain was, and it's Mr. Freeze. There is a Batman Beyond episode where basically... Okay, for context, there are several Mr. Freeze episodes of the original Batman animated series. And one of them is quite funny because it stars, guest stars a guest villain who's just literally Walt Disney. He wants to recreate the circumstances of Mr. Freeze's accident to make himself similarly immortal. And I was like, is this episode just about the fucking, Walt Disney is a frozen head somewhere conspiracy theory? Which was extremely funny. But in either that episode or a later one, it's revealed that the cellular degradation Mr. Freeze has suffered from his accident has basically left him as just a head in a jar with, spider legs. Sorry, real quick, person in chat. The idea that the next Batman necessitates being Batman's biological son is kind of eugenicist. I agree. Amanda Waller is not a good person. Anyway, so basically, his body got too fucked up, and his head is now just being life preserved in a jar, and the suit he walks around in is basically just like a robot suit. And I think he has a fake out death in that episode. Maybe he gets frozen in a glacier for a while or some shit. But in the timeline of Batman Beyond, which is of course 50 years in the future, someone just joined chat. Who are you, mysterious verified person? Right. Anyway, sorry. Brain is firing on every single cylinder right now. Basically, god damn. Sorry, it's been an extremely long week. This was a dubious decision, but I'm standing by it. Yes, he becomes a brain in a jar, or just a head in a jar. And the thing is, the main villain of Batman Beyond first couple seasons is this dude, Blight, who's an industrialist dickhead, who is responsible for the death of Terry's father. And he gets horribly irradiated and mutated in the first episode. So he kind of looks the same, but underneath that, he's a green skeleton man. Basically, this scientist is you've experienced cellular damage, but I believe we can find a way to clone you a new repaired body, and we're going to test this out first on this guy, and it's Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze's frozen head is what's up? My life is pain. I would welcome a chance to not suffer from that. So they clone him a new body, and they transfer his mind into it, and he's like, wow, this is great. I can once again feel the cool breeze and walk on a warm summer's day with a hot wind in my face. And it doesn't last more than 3 days. He starts deteriorating, and they're like, oh, shame. Well, let's kill him. And he gets pretty pissed. Goes and gets his freeze suit back, goes on a rampage. And the B plot of this episode, basically, is that Terry is I think Mr. Freeze has turned over a new leaf. I think we should trust him. And Bruce is absolutely the fuck not. And of course, the fact that he kind of gets pushed into being a bad guy again is no. And Terry's I guess you were right. And Bruce is we both were. And, it's fine. Because it wasn't a ploy. Freeze was trying to turn over a new leaf, but it's a tragedy. And at the end of that episode, he straight up dies. Batman Beyond does this a lot. It straight up ices a lot of the bad guys. Yeah. Anyway, but Terry tries to rescue him, and Freeze, he's this place is coming down, you'll die. And Freeze is believe me, you're the only one who cares. And he makes an ice wall so Terry can't get to him, and then he dies, and it's really sad. I don't know. Mr. Freeze is just an absolute tragedy, and I love him. So that's that question answered. Oh, back to more tea. Who is your favorite Monkey King spinoff? Well, I've mentioned my conspiracy theory about this to you guys, I think. Because there are a lot of them that are like very active adaptations, like purposeful, where all the characters are basically the same. But I've mentioned that Inuyasha is like character for character very similar, right? And I've gone on the record as that being one of my like extremely formative hyperfixations, so that's gotta be my answer. And it is fun. I like it. Let's see. Let me just sit up a little bit. What are your thoughts on Predaking from Transformers Prime? I love him. He's really cool. I wish there was more of him. He's really interesting because he's introduced as just like this like non-verbal giant robot dragon. He's a Transformers dragon, basically. And they do some really sneaky, like, visual, just like, he'll react to things or be in the background of shots, like, noticing stuff. And basically, after about 3 episodes of being, like, smacked around by Starscream, who is just treating him like a big dumb animal, he, like, transforms into a humanoid version that can talk and is, like, a head and shoulders taller than Megatron, and everyone immediately has to reassess the power balance. I guess I haven't explained the Inuyasha conspiracy theory. So here's the thing. I know they like have some specific episodic like filler references to the actual story, but like if you break down the 5-man band and the order in which they meet them, it's like really on point. So first of all, you have the protagonist, Kagome, who is a reincarnation of an extremely important person in the past, Kikyo. Tripitaka is a reincarnation of Golden Cicada. The first person she meets is Inuyasha, who is at the time magically sealed and has been for 50 years. He's like stuck to a tree in stasis with an arrow through him. He's fine. It's cosmetic. Of course, the first person Tripitaka meets on his journey that is there to help him is Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, who is sealed under a mountain. Like the seal that's keeping him there cannot be removed except by the chosen, Tripitaka. So he removes the seal and the Monkey King joins the quest to help him, but is initially kind of antagonistic. Inuyasha is sealed to the tree with this magic arrow. Kagome can release it because she kind of is still Kikyo, sort of, so it's her power sealing him. Frees him, but he is kind of hostile and uncontrollable and antagonistic when they're first met. Tripitaka gets Monkey under control with Kuan Yin's help by basically putting the fillet, the circlet of subjugation on him. Inuyasha has a necklace that does the exact same thing. Whenever he tries to do anything bad, he gets forced to faceplant. Then they basically have to go on the adventure together. Of course, in Journey to the West, we have to take the Tripitaka, not the guy, the scriptures, but, you know, also the guy, from point A to point B, and in the show, we have to retrieve all these MacGuffins, but that's basically just, like, the driving force that makes the plot happen. The first person they encounter is not particularly threatening, and mostly just serves to help them get from point A to point B sometimes. In the book, that is the dragon horse. In the show, that is Shippo, who is extremely cute, but overall very useless, and can sometimes turn into like a big balloon and just like float them up cliffs and stuff. The next character they encounter is a rather lecherous and like hedonistic character who is, let's see, masquerading as something he is not. In the book, that is Pigsy. In the show, that is Moroku, the monk, who is very much the sort of like, I am, you know, I'm like a womanizer and I like good food and like nice wine, but I also portray myself as a man of like the cloth and all that stuff. And then the final character they encounter is possibly the most dangerous person in the group who isn't the main powerhouse, Monkey, Inuyasha, who is an extremely strong warrior, with like an unusually large weapon. I can keep kind of going, but basically in the book that is Sandy, and in the show that is Sango. And she's initially introduced in kind of an antagonistic role, and then she very quickly joins the group. And then from that point forward, they basically have episodic adventures where they fight monsters of the week of various kinds. And a lot of them correspond one-to-one to bad guys from chapters of Journey to the West. So it's good. It's a good connection that I like. There's like other stuff. There's like a straight up thing where they deal with basically the bone demon lady. I don't know. I like that show. Spoiler alert. All right, drink more tea. It's not like what all the secondary characters don't line up, but if I had to say Sesshomaru was anybody, he could be one of the other like 3 weird superpowered monkeys. There are 4 of them. The 6-eared macaque shows up a couple times. But also Sesshomaru is not in the main 5 group, so he doesn't have to be the horse or any of them. It's fine. Anyway. Sorry, just checking chat. Naraku doesn't have a specific corresponding figure. There isn't an overarching bad guy in Journey to the West, but that I consider kind of the pretense of necessary to make it a fun episodic show with an overarching bad guy, because Journey to the West is perfectly designed for like episodic adventures, because it like, you know, it lets you do a lot of weird stuff, because the whole point is get from point A to point B. But the version in the show, Inuyasha, is we need to collect all the bits of this jewel, and also there's this bad guy who we all hate who's also collecting pieces of this jewel. And that basically is the same way to get the characters to walk through a whole bunch of interesting set pieces and bad guys. It's like dangling a big bad at the very end so they can go beat him up. All right. Let's drink the thing that I have that isn't tea. Isn't that exactly the start of Dragon Ball in a good way? It absolutely is. The start of Dragon Ball is very blatantly a Journey to the West homage. Son Goku is how you read the Chinese character for Sun Wukong in Japanese. Bulma is the Tripitaka figure. They meet a shape-shifting pig like minute 1. And they meet Yamcha in a sandy desert. So the squad in the first season of original Dragon Ball is very much meant to be an homage to Journey to the West. And then it just kind of escalated from there. The mystery drink is a smoothie I made earlier. It's not fantastic, but it's pretty good. Bulma doesn't correspond to Tripitaka in any way except that she's the impetus that makes the story happen and wants to do it while everyone else is helping her out. She has nothing else in common with him, but they do fill the exact same role in the story. Let's see. Thoughts on Tokusatsu, the live-action stuff we know as Power Rangers and Kamen Rider as examples. I know they happen. That's kind of all I got. I missed the boat on Power Rangers. Didn't watch it as a youth. So, Red, you haven't done a Halo, have ye? I swear to God, I can't think of a single franchise with more opaque lore than Halo. There's so much shit happening in it. In a recent Trope Talk that isn't out yet, I had to pull footage from Halo Reach as an example. And so I just like grabbed the cutscene movie, and I swear, I try and get things where, like, the visual communicates what I want it to do without you needing to know the dialogue of what's going on. And with a Halo, it's like, all right, these guys are looking up at a big spaceship. I don't know if that's good or bad. Is that their big spaceship? Is it a bad guy big spaceship? And then, like, okay, a space laser just descended from the heavens and exploded a ship. I think that was bad. But I struck gold because, like halfway through, there's a bit where the hero, like, crests a hill and sees the burning city in front of him, and we get a close-up shot of his hand as he dangles the dog tags of his fallen friend, and I was like, there it is. Thank goodness certain military SF tropes never change. Anyway, I have watched the BDG video about Halo lore, which served me well when I watched the first, like, 6 out of 8 episodes of the Halo series that came out semi-recently, which was interesting. It definitely seemed to line up with some of the lore I knew. Wasn't super sure about most of it, but, you know, whatever. I knew it was kind of its own timeline because they were doing shit that never happens in the games, which is fine by me. I think it was a little bit weak sauce that they had him keep taking off his helmet. I think they were trying not to be accused of being too similar to the Mandalorian. And as mentioned, I tapped out of that show in rage when they had a lady fully rip off her own fingernail on screen, and it nearly made me pass out from nausea. So, me and that show aren't on speaking terms anymore, but parts of it were cool. Oh, boy. Someone keeps saying solo leveling. I don't know what that is. Sorry. All right, we're back. All right, none of you have told me what solo leveling is. Oh, it's a Korean webtoon. That tells me nothing of importance about it. All right, all I'm hearing is it's a webcomic and it's okay. I don't know why you're asking about it so much then. What is your take on Watchmen? Well, I've mentioned this elsewhere. I think that Watchmen is fine for what it is, was extremely innovative at the time, and a lot of people think they get it and don't, which is fine. It's very opaque. It's got a lot of stuff hidden in it. But it's kind of embarrassing by proxy to see a lot of those guys be very confident that they know what it's about. Alan Moore, as mentioned in the first Superman Detail Diatribe, is a man who understands Superman with unique clarity and understands the purpose of heroes that are hopeful and good. But he also writes a lot of stories that are extremely dark and bleak about what's wrong with a world where our heroes act like flawed humans and allow themselves to be selfish or depressed or show any form of weakness. And a lot of people took from this the idea that a more realistic take on Superman personalities or superheroes in general is automatically sad and depressing and grimdark, and everyone taking it seriously is embarrassing. Which I think appeals to a lot of people who, I don't know, were maybe unironically into this stuff when they were younger and then retroactively got very, very embarrassed about this, which is a turnaround I've observed in a lot of stuff. It's not unique to superhero comics, but it's true, I think, that a lot of times when people are extremely into something and then they get a little older, they get a little more context, or they move on to something else, and they look back on who they were when they liked that thing, they become very embarrassed and very angry. And rather than necessarily just being like, all right, that's how things go, you know, just move on, cringe is dead, everything's fine, they redirect that frustration into themselves and what they think made them that way. Like, they can't just be like, oh, yeah, I had a specific taste in stories and I got something out of them and I liked them. And, you know, it was fine that I enjoyed that. They have to be like, I was cringe and it was this thing's fault. And there's like a 2-year turnaround for this, I've observed. I spend some time on Tumblr. I've seen this happen with so many beloved properties. It feels like the more everybody loves it at the time, the harder the cringe hammer swings when the pendulum swings the other way. And it becomes kind of a crab bucket situation because everybody who's suddenly insisting that this thing is cringe now feels that they have to drag down everybody else who still likes it. Because if they don't, they won't be firm enough in their conviction that this thing was cringe and they're denouncing their past attachment to it. And thus you get this sort of exponentially increasing wave of just like almost like borderline full-on harassment and bullying online about like, how dare you like this thing that I used to like, but I'm better than that now. And, you know, the more people who get sort of bullied into submission by it, the more people join this wave of like, oh, haven't you heard? You're not allowed to enjoy that anymore. It's actually cringe. Anyway, it's just kind of sad because I understand why it happens. You know, a lot of people, especially people who like fixate on things to a perhaps rather neurodivergent degree, often suffer extreme levels of bullying just in general for not being able to properly mask or not, you know, not being able to sort of pass as quote unquote normal. It just, you know, magnetizes certain forms of harassment and bullying towards them. And when you're faced with that, it can affect the way you see the world. One of the most common ways this can happen is it can sort of instill in you the idea that there is a binary dichotomy between bullies and victims. And if you are not a victim, you are a bully. Or rather, the way to spare yourself victimhood is to be a bully. And so you get these perpetuating cycles of abuse in spaces that could be about building each other up and reinforcing that it's okay to be the way that they are, but instead turns into like sort of an arms race to be the most like normal person in the room. And it's just very sad, I think, you know. Sometimes you got to open yourself up to a little ridicule to really be yourself. Anyway, more smoothie. It's a pretty alarming shade of green, I'm not gonna lie. I think if you put this in like a Lovecraft story, it would absolutely be like rotting you from the inside out. Can you pinpoint a movie or show when you figured out that gore just wasn't for you? Well, I don't tend to like seeing people turned inside out, but it happened when I watched the 2019 Hellboy remake that was really bad. And it's like, I would have understood it if it was trying to be quote-unquote true to the comics, but the comics are funny. They're not gory and weird. Like, they are a little bit weird, but they're not that level of just gross for gross's sake. So it was clearly a directorial choice, and one I didn't agree with. And it just felt very icky. This has bothered me for years. Did you do the guitar riffs for the Prophecy and the Aeneid video yourself? You know, it's been a while, but I think I did. If it's kind of just like scratchy electric guitar that's not really doing anything fancy, I think that was me. Yeah, it's been a while. I'm probably going to want to tap out in like, let's say 5 minutes because I didn't give advance warning. Just, you know, spare my throat a little bit, down another mug of tea before sleep. But yeah, let's wrap this baby down. Wind this baby down? Wrap it up? Yeah, that's the stuff. You got me to the IDW Sonic comics. Thanks. Hell yeah. Finally, it's spreading. I should have known that giving you guys a time limit would mean the chat increases extremely quick. Got any guilty pleasure shows or movies? As mentioned, I am a firm believer that a guilty pleasure is just a thing you enjoy that someone else made you feel bad about, and we've just discussed my thoughts on cringe culture. So, no, I enjoy all things unironically. Except for the things that I think are bad and watch anyway. But I enjoy those because it's fun to watch train wrecks sometimes. What do you think about Charlie Chaplin and his works? I think it's old. That's about as deep as it gets. I've seen a couple clips from it. That's like silent movie era shit. So, the Halo TV show. Yeah, I mean, I liked parts of it. Some parts of it were kind of really solid. It did seem to be undercutting a lot of important concepts from Halo. Not that I know them. But the bit with him being like, this thing is suppressing all my emotions and feelings, and I think I maybe want that to not be true anymore, and then he pops it out, and there's just a lot of like good visual storytelling and just acting from the actor who plays him. As he like goes to like an outdoor music festival and like a dog runs up to him, and just like you can see in his face that he's not accustomed to experiencing that sort of joy in community. And then similarly, the moment leading up to that, where he sees like the infantrymen all hanging out and chatting, and then like the Spartans are all like in a cold, sterile room together playing 3D chess, and it's like, this is good visual storytelling for feeling alienated from humanity because you have been forcefully alienated from humanity. That was an interesting thing the show did. It also did a lot of stuff I think was dumb, but yeah. Did you ever play Halo? No, but I knew a guy in high school who played a lot of Halo, so I absorbed some of it by proxy, but not much. Thoughts on Rooibos tea? I like it. It's like sweet, kind of. Do you record whole songs or just the needed amount? I usually just record the needed bit. Sometimes I will pick a part of the song that is less complicated to play because of that. But I have at times tried to record whole songs. The problem is I like mess up enough and it frustrates me enough that it's more efficient if I'm just trying to get the ending song done that I'll just record like the 30 seconds or so around that. What is your favorite / least favorite tea? Well, least favorite has a new winner as of the last time I streamed. That really gross ginger turmeric tea. Because the problem is, okay, here's the thing. It's loose leaf, right? So you have to make it with a diffuser. And I have like a tea kettle with a diffuser sort of built into it, like you slot it in the middle. Which the design would indicate that you're supposed to leave it in there the whole time. But apparently a lot of loose leaf teas have specific brewing time instructions, which doesn't make sense. So apparently it doesn't escalate to like radioactive levels of undrinkable unless you leave it in for like half an hour. But it is pretty nasty even normally. Let's see. DuckTales is good. Well, the 2017 one. It's really good. I've actually been meaning to rewatch it because it made me feel feelings. Yeah, all right. We're probably going to... We've hit about 5 minutes. We're going to, I'd say, wind down. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in to this completely unscripted and barely coherent stream where I just kind of shot the shit about random stuff that I liked. Or didn't like, as the case may be. I'm going to have to, re-listen to this to timestamp it. Hopefully it's coherent. But yeah, this was really fun. Hopefully, as everybody else recovers from con exhaustion, we'll be able to get back in the saddle, maybe do a few more, larger streams with people. I think that could be very exciting. Yeah, I'm always surprised at how these go over even halfway well, but I really do appreciate it. Having an outlet for my constant rambles is a rare privilege. Anyway, I will see y'all in the next video that comes out on Friday, I think. I think that's, yeah, I mean, well, a video comes out on Friday. I just don't remember which one. Anyway, bye, everybody.